Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari-chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed your weekend because we are about to dig into a longer session of Peerless Volume 4, also known as Wu Shuang by Meng Xi Shi, and I can't wait! Ooh, this is so exciting! We finally have Feng Xiao back. So let's go ahead and continue reading to see how things go. Chapter 140. Qing's goal on this trip had evolved from merely investigating a case to preserving his own life. If he'd previously thought Yang Yuan lacked the courage to kill an envoy of the court, he no longer doubted his ruthlessness. The county magistrate Huang Lue was dead, and this was Yang Yuan's territory. Li Yan, Wu Yi, and the others all obeyed Yang Yuan. In truth, it would be all too easy to have Qing quietly killed. Perhaps he had been washed away by the flood, or fought with Huang Lue over an unequal division of profits. Yang Yuan would have no trouble concocting a perfectly plausible cause of death after ridding himself of Qing. As a relative of the emperor, he enjoyed a level of deference from the royal couple. Even if they enlisted another censor to continue the investigation, the newcomer might lack the resolve to pursue the truth. This would create only more opportunities for Yang Yuan to manipulate the situation. Tsway Boo-qoo was thus the most significant variable. Only if Tsway Boo-qoo was safe would his own safety be guaranteed. They sat in the relay station, Qing still in shock. Tsway Boo-qoo seemed to sense his thoughts and mercilessly splashed another pail of cold water over him. "I almost lost 2 of my men already. You saw it too. They won't scruple to kill even me. If we discover nothing more in these 2.5 days, if I can't offer an explanation to His Majesty, Yang Yuan will make an example of you." Tsway Boo-qoo spoke his next words with deliberate emphasis. "Whatever you're imagining, they're capable of that and more." Qing felt a chill go through him. How could they be so audacious? All this just to embezzle some grain? Feng Xiao laughed. "Isn't that like telling someone they should eat meat porridge when there's no rice? Granaries are the backbone of a nation. Rice is more valuable than gold during a famine, and even gold can't buy you food if there's none to be had. But once this flood recedes, the grain can be stored, and it'll last at least a decade. They can trade it for even more valuable things." Qing had also realized he'd said something foolish. His face was hot as he asked, "What things?" "Salt, iron," said Tsway Boo-qoo. "Does Yang Yuan mean to rebel?" blurted Qing. When he'd first arrived, Qing had only known this was a serious disaster and worried that the local officials might be negligent in their duties. He'd planned to supervise them closely, keenly watching their every move. Later, he'd begun to realize things were far more complicated than he'd thought. Officials of all ranks were colluding to embezzle grain, but he never guessed they would be so insane as to rebel against the emperor. The situation had escalated far beyond anything he'd imagined. "Maybe not rebel," amended Tsway Boo-qoo, "but they certainly can't escape the charge of corruption." He glanced at Feng Xiao. "I have a question for Deputy Chief. What are you doing here?" Feng Xiao sighed. "Oh, Tsway Langjun, we're old friends reuniting in a strange land. Must you take such a tone?" Tsway Boo-qoo smiled faintly. "Very well, old friend. If you don't wish to say it now, you can keep it to yourself forever. Don't bother telling me. After all, it's not my life that's in danger. Worst case, when the Zhuoye guard arrives, I'll simply dust off my hands and walk away. Poor Censor Rong will have to shoulder all the blame himself. Perhaps he'll lose his own insignificant life." Shaking all over, Qing looked toward Feng Xiao. His flat, square face was wrenched into a pitiful, aggrieved expression, like a small animal frightened for its life. Unfortunately for him, Feng Xiao had killed even the lovely Feng Xiaolian without a second thought. He didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy for a grown man like Qing. Rather, his eyes had been fixed on Tsway Boo-qoo the entire time. especially on his arm where it had been sliced by the strings. He had yet to change his clothes, and the raw welts were still exposed. Feng Xiao's gaze lingered there almost indecently, so intense it seemed to burn into Tsway Boo-qoo's skin. Tsway Boo-qoo's expression darkened. In principle, Feng Xiao reflected, it was like teasing a cat or a fox. The animal would jump about at first, eyes on the reed in your hand, and it made for good entertainment. But when the fox got frustrated and tried to claw at you, it was time to stop. A few scratches were a small matter, but it would be a great loss if the animal developed a grudge. Feng Xiao quickly schooled his face to seriousness. I received an anonymous letter. He produced the missive and put it on the table. Tsway Boo-qoo picked it up and unfolded it. Only 2 lines were written on the paper. On the highlands, I feel right at home. The treasured jade my lord covets so. The first line came from a historical record from the Han Dynasty entitled Shi. Home referred to Fangling Province, modern-day Guangqian County. Rong didn't understand the significance of the second line, but Tsway Boo-qoo and Feng Xiao both saw at once that it was about the Jade of Heaven Lake. Is this that old man's handwriting? Feng Xiao asked. Of course he meant Fan Yun. He knows many kinds of calligraphy, regular, cursive, and seal script, so I could say so. But this person must know the whereabouts of the Jade of Heaven Lake. If it's not Fan Yun, it's a member of the 13 floors. Feng Xiao shrugged. Wouldn't it be stranger if I didn't come? Tsway Boo-qoo arched a brow. Li Shise? I just happened to find out that the Li family has an impotent son named Li Shise, Feng Xiao said with a smile. They had enough of him fooling around in his hometown, so they sent him to the city to put him to work. I intercepted him while he was en route and used the technique changing the skies, substituting the sun to steal his face, assuming his identity. Honestly, he should be grateful. How else could he manage to get into the eldest son's good graces in a few days and even be taken under his wing? Feng Xiao hadn't yet been included in the core affairs of the Li family, but he was adept at navigating social situations and extracting information through indirect means. In a short time, he'd amassed quite a bit that was useful, such as the strange happenings at Xiao Villa. Li Shise's identity, when used well, was an excellent tool. Unfortunately, now that he'd been exposed, he had no choice but to emerge from the dark to work out in the open. Feng Xiao looked at Tsway Boo-qoo, his meaning plain. Your turn. Half a month ago, Tsway Boo-qoo began slowly, when you gave me that list of names, several people on it caught my eye. One of them was Yang Yuan. I thought there was something odd about him, so I looked into his political achievements in Guangqian Commandery over the past few years. That was when I discovered something odder still. Tsway Boo-qoo wasn't one to overreact. If he said he found something strange, it must have been truly alarming. Feng Xiao reclined on his side with his chin propped in one hand, the picture of indolence as he awaited Tsway Boo-qoo's next words. But Tsway Boo-qoo didn't look at him. His gaze instead landed on Rong. At the censor's blank expression, Tsway Boo-qoo had to resist the urge to smack him. He turned his gaze back to Feng Xiao. He ignored Feng Xiao's sputtered laugh and said, Guangqian has been plagued with disaster since ancient times. Since the first year of the Kai Huang era, Yang Yuan used the floods and poor harvests as an excuse to suggest a policy of waiving taxes for those who contribute grain to the commandery's stores. In effect, the prominent families donate food to their own people during lean times, and in exchange, they're exempted from taxes the following year. In this way, the commandery supports itself with no need for government aid. Ah, murmured Rong. He did recall hearing about this some years ago. At that time, the emperor had been pleased and praised Yang Yuan for his ingenuity. Not only did his plan relieve the imperial court's burden with regard to distributing foodstuffs, it even saved the court money. This approach was completely different from the rest of the commanderies and counties. Of course, the emperor's commendation was also likely a way for him to remind the court that his family, too, had promising descendants. Zhongqing recalled that the emperor had wanted to promote Yang Yuan, but his relation had declined, protesting that promotion had to follow regulations and that he didn't want preferential treatment. The emperor hadn't been displeased at being rebuffed. Instead, his appreciation for Yang Yuan grew. Even without the promotion, Yang Yuan would likely rise steadily in the ranks over the next few years. He'd enter the central government and have much greater power within his grasp. However, Tsway Boo-qoo's voice broke through Zhongqing's churning thoughts. When I sent people to investigate Guangtian County, they found that though there was plenty of rain in the last 2 years, it never caused floods on this scale, which is to say, there was no need for the families of the county to donate any grain. Tsway Boo-qoo spoke his next words carefully. Yang Yuan set up a donation policy for tax exemption, but even if the grain was donated, it wasn't needed by the locals. So where did the surplus grain go? After the flood this year, the imperial court dispersed grain to Guangtian, but Huang Lue said it wasn't enough. If the court's contributions are insufficient, why not use the grain they've hoarded for the past 2 years? In other words, Zhongqing murmured, Yang Yuan has been deceiving the court for 2 years, and all the surplus grain went into his own pocket? Perhaps, Tsway Boo-qoo said, or perhaps not. Whatever the truth of the matter is, Huang Lue must have had inside knowledge of this scheme, or even been one of the participants. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to kill him. But Huang Lue alone isn't capable of running such a huge operation for Yang Yuan. Li Yan and Wu Yi are almost certainly involved as well. That's right, Feng Xiao said. And the Li and the Ding families must have benefited from this tax exemption policy, so they were in on it too. Zhongqing sprang up, agitated. Then we should target Li Yan and Wu Yi, find an opening there. And there's Qiao Villa. If they're storing that much rice there, it'll take some time to move it all. We can take people there now and surround the place. It's not too late. Feng Xiao shook his head. It is too late. Before Zhongqing could ask what he meant, Xiao Liu, who was supposed to be outside gathering news, burst in, drenched in sweat. My lord, there's a fire north of the city. Everyone's talking about it. Zhongqing's heart stuttered in his chest. He couldn't help but glance at Feng Xiao and the others. North of the city where? Xiao Liu gesticulated wildly. They said halfway up the mountain. If I had to guess, it must be around Qiao Villa. The fire is huge. You can see the smoke from inside the city. It's been raining elsewhere, yet this place caught fire. Misfortune truly never comes alone. Forgetting everything else, Zhongqing ran outside the relay station. He didn't need anyone to guide him. He could see the black smoke rising in the north. A single glance told him the size of the conflagration. Even if the villa's residents were working to put out the fire, it'd be impossible to extinguish quickly. But they wouldn't be trying to put it out. They'd rather let the fire rage until it consumed everything in the villa. All that rice. When Zhongqing thought how many refugees the rice could have saved, his heart ached. There would be nothing left in Qiao Villa. An important lead snuffed out. 2 days were left. Yang Yuan had ruled uncontested here for many years. What could they do in a mere 2 days? Zhongqing had never been at such a loss. That evening, the group met once more, and everyone split up to work on their own tasks. Guan Shanhai and Xian stayed in the relay station to recover from their injuries. Feng Xiao discarded his disguise as Li Shise and left to look for Huang Lue's relatives, though this was likely to be of little help. There was no guarantee Huang Lue had left any other clues before his death. Tsway Boo-qoo departed to investigate Li Yan and Wu Yi, 2 key figures in the matter of the grain embezzlement. They too had relatives and connections within the county. For instance, Tsway Boo-qoo had learned that Li Yan was keeping a mistress outside his household without telling his tigress of a wife. Perhaps this was a new lead they could follow. As for Rong, he was writing a memorial to the emperor. Although the facts of the case were far from clear, he didn't know where he'd be in 2 days. To prevent Yang Yuan from burying everything, a memorial delineating their findings and asking for the emperor's intervention was vital. Rong sat in the courtyard in a daze. One thought loomed large in his mind. However powerful the enemy might be, they couldn't hide all that grain. Qiao Villa had burned, but traces must remain elsewhere. And then there was the matter of the refugees. Guangqian County was the seat of government in Guangqian Commandery. The victims who'd camped outside the city were desperate and must have come to plead for help. Yang Yuan and his faction couldn't have silenced everyone. There had to be survivors. But where were they? If they could find even 1 or 2, they'd have living witnesses. Xiao Liu came over carrying a pot of stew. "Your lordship has hardly eaten or slept the past few days. I can see you've grown thinner. I borrowed the kitchen here and cooked some pigeon soup for you. Drink it while it's hot," he said. The aroma of warm soup pulled Rong out of his abstraction. His spirits lifted a little, and he said with a smile, "Well, I haven't tasted your cooking since we left the capital. How could I refuse?" He lifted the lid and inhaled deeply. "What's that smell?" It was Tsway Boo-qoo, who'd walked in through the open gates. Rong was too embarrassed to drink the whole bowl in front of him, so he held out the pot. "Pigeon soup. Would you like a sip, Tsway Xianqiang?" Tsway Boo-qoo glanced at it and said unceremoniously, "All right." He took the pot with both hands and lowered his head to drink. Cold steel flashed behind him. A dagger glinted in Xiao Liu's hand as he soundlessly swung it down on Tsway Boo-qoo's back. I knew I didn't trust this. Chapter 141. Xiao Liu had seen Feng Xiao leave the relay station with his own eyes and knew he wouldn't be back any time soon. Even if Feng Xiao did sense something and rush back, distant waters couldn't extinguish a nearby fire. He would never make it in time to save Tsway Boo-qoo. As for Rong, his view was completely obstructed by Tsway Boo-qoo, whose neck was bent as he prepared to drink the soup. He had no idea what was going on. Xiao Liu knew Tsway Boo-qoo was fairly lucky, but beyond dumb luck, it was his sharp intellect that kept him alive. Time and again, crises had transformed into opportunities, mostly thanks to Tsway Boo-qoo's knack for foreseeing danger and deftly manipulating his environment. But now, his guards were incapacitated and far away, leaving only the useless Rong at his side, whom, then, could he rely on for help? The edge of the poisoned dagger gleamed. Xiao Liu's hand was steady, decisive, and lightning fast. Just as the knife was about to plunge into Tsway Boo-qoo's back, the smirk on Xiao Liu's lips froze. A hand was clasped firmly around his wrist. A strong gust of wind surged around him, and Xiao Liu was forced to abandon the prize within his grasp to turn toward the new threat. How had this man appeared so suddenly? He must have been lying in wait, observing Xiao Liu's every move in secret. Rong was stunned. Moments ago, he'd covered his mouth to stifle a yawn, yet now chaos had erupted all around him. Even if Xiao Liu didn't want Tsway Boo-qoo to drink the soup, there was no need to resort to violence. Rong, I don't think that's it. Wait, when had his attendant acquired such formidable skills? And who was the man fighting him? Xiao Liu found his strikes blocked from all directions. Despite the vastness of the courtyard, he was soon forced into a corner. The attacks from his assailant were relentless, though the man's martial arts were nothing special. Xiao Liu was an accomplished assassin who knew little martial arts. His attacker's abilities were more than enough to pin him down. Having lost the element of surprise, killing his target would be nearly impossible. But failing this mission would mean his death. Turning back was not an option. Adrenaline surging, Xiao Liu gritted his teeth and, disregarding the blows raining down on him, switched directions midair to lunge toward Tsway Boo-qoo. It was a gamble. He was betting on his speed, hoping to eliminate Tsway Boo-qoo before his foe could intervene. Xiao Liu pushed his Qinggong to the limit, but couldn't close the distance between himself and Tsway Boo-qoo. In desperation, he hurled the dagger. It shot through the air, aimed squarely at Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder. By the time Tsway Boo-qoo sought to evade it, it was too late. Yet just as the dagger threatened to sink into his flesh, a rush of air knocked it aside, sending it clattering harmlessly to the ground with a crisp, bright sound. Hot soup splashed over the stone as the pot fell alongside the dagger and shattered into countless fragments. Xiao Liu caught Rong Qing's bewildered gaze and nearly coughed up blood in frustration. But the tables had turned. Before he could make his next move, his opponent was upon him. Pain erupted in his back as a powerful kick sent him crashing to the ground, blood spilling from his mouth. His vision went dark. In the next moment, his arms were twisted painfully behind him, rendering him immobile. "Dislocate his jaw," Tsway Boo-qoo cried. He had immediately seen through Xiao Liu's intentions. Blindsided, Xiao Liu found himself unable to bite down on the poison hidden in his mouth, drool pooling in a humiliating puddle as he struggled. If not for the hatred burning in his eyes, he would have looked ridiculous. "This isn't Xiao Liu," Rong Qing exclaimed in disbelief. "Where's the real Xiao Liu? What did you do to him?" He shook the assassin with all his might, but the man merely sneered. Pei Jingzhe, for it was indeed he, breathed a long sigh of relief and finally stood up straight. The stinging pain at his waist made him grimace, and he was almost unable to maintain his dignified image as a member of the Jiejian Bureau. In fact, Pei Jingzhe had arrived in Guangqian County alongside Feng Xiao. His skills had thus far gone unused, since where martial arts were needed, Feng Xiao could do a better job. After Feng Xiao's identity was exposed, Pei Jingzhe had become a hidden pawn, patiently waiting for his moment to shine. Earlier that day, Feng Xiao had departed, and Tsway Boo-qoo had instructed Pei Jingzhe to furtively follow him around instead. Pei Jingzhe had concealed himself in various out-of-the-way spots, closets, rafters, trees, anywhere he could remain unnoticed, to the point his back was about to snap from crouching in so many tight spaces. Fortunately, Tsway Boo-qoo hadn't been aiming to torture him. Xiao Liu soon exposed himself, allowing Pei Jingzhe to spring into action and be freed from swallowing more mosquitoes. Tsway Boo-qoo's analysis had otherwise proved correct. Xiao Liu's martial arts were unimpressive. Their foe was simply using the assassin to eliminate Tsway Boo-qoo. Pei Jingzhe alone was enough to thwart him. In the meantime, Rong Qing had shaken Xiao Liu with such force that the man vomited a second mouthful of blood. Yet the assassin still refused to, or perhaps could not, reveal where the real Xiao Liu had gone. "He likely replaced the real Xiao Liu when you entered the array in the forest," Tsway Boo-qoo explained. "He was with me for 6 whole years and followed me from my hometown to the capital." Rong Qing slowly released the assassin, turning away with reddened eyes. He was honest, tactful, and a good cook." Pei Jingzhe felt a pang of sympathy. He patted Rong Qing's shoulder. "We'll avenge him." Now Rong Qing understood. Tsway Boo-qoo had sent everyone away to make it more convenient for Xiao Liu to attack. Suspicions were only suspicions, after all, and not enough to justify arresting and interrogating Xiao Liu. "Tsway Xianxiang, once this matter is resolved, I want to search for Xiao Liu," he said. "I need to find him, whether alive or dead, even if he's... I should still take him home for a proper burial." "That's fine." Tsway Boo-qoo wasn't so cold that he'd refuse such a request, as long as it didn't jeopardize the mission. Pei Jingzhe stepped forward. Using a wet cloth, he gently rubbed the disguise from the assassin's face. A translucent layer peeled away along with most of Xiao Liu's honest face, revealing the gaunt visage of a stranger. "Do you want to torture him?" Pei Jingzhe asked. An idea struck him. "Perhaps I should ask Xiaonyangzi to disguise me as Xiao Liu. They won't know he hasn't made a move, And we can wait for them to contact me. It could lead us to another clue. Tsway Boo-qoo shook his head. It won't work. First, he's an expendable agent. He knows nothing beyond the target of his mission. Second, this type of disposable soldier is meant to be used but once. If he fails to act, our foe will realize something is off. They won't contact you. Then what should we do? Rong piped up, asking Pei Jingzhe's question. They were like turtles trapped in an urn, unable to glimpse the outside world and relying on instinct to blindly flounder their way forward. Even if they managed to fumble their way through this challenge, another would be waiting. They couldn't guarantee they'd come out safe again. Even worse, they were running out of time. Yang Yuan had issued an ultimatum, and in 2 days he planned to act on it. But in actuality, he'd already made his move. Huang Lue's death, the burning of Qiao Villa, the unknown fates of the missing refugees. Their leads were dead and their information piecemeal, while the enemy's defenses felt impenetrable. Their defeat seemed a foregone conclusion. Zhongting couldn't think of any way for them to turn the tide. He looked at Tsway Boo-qoo hopefully. When will your Zuoyue guard arrive, Tsway Xianxiang? Tsway Boo-qoo cast him a sidelong glance. His response was shocking. I only said that to intimidate Yang Yuan. I never called for them. Rong froze stiff with alarm. He couldn't be blamed for his reaction. He hadn't been a censor for long, and Guangqian was his first official assignment outside the capital. It was meant to be a straightforward trip escorting aid. Yet, instead, he'd found himself up against a deadly enemy. Even such titans as the Zuoye Bureau's Chief Tsway and Deputy Chief Feng were ensnared here, to say nothing of the insignificant Rong. If they didn't get to the bottom of this case, grim fates awaited them all. Of course, Rong hadn't known about the treachery lurking under the surface in Guangqian County, nor about the 13 floors pulling the strings. He'd only thought Yang Yuan so prideful that he found even an imperial envoy beneath his notice. After all, how could one man create such chaos and wield such power? Only later, as the complexities of the case unraveled before his eyes, did he begin to understand how very out of his depth he was. Pei Jingzhe was momentarily taken aback. If your lordship doesn't summon the Zuoye guard, we're alone here. Qiao is still injured. If Yang Yuan truly intends to slaughter us all, I won't be able to protect your lordship, even if I offer up my life. Tsway Boo-qoo calmly raised a finger. Pei Jingzhe stared at it with wide eyes, trying with all his might to decipher what Tsway Boo-qoo meant by this gesture. But Tsway Boo-qoo simply wagged it at him. You're thinking about it all wrong. Pei Jingzhe was silent. Perhaps he had grown too accustomed to Tsway Boo-qoo's icy expression when he traded barbs with Feng Xiao. For a moment, he struggled to believe Chief Tsway could also be so childish. But the next words from Tsway Boo-qoo's mouth were exceedingly grave. The Zuoye Bureau has no manpower to send. Pei Jingzhe gaped at him. How can that be? The Zuoye Bureau was an elusive organization, but while Pei Jingzhe knew they didn't have as many personnel as the Zhejian Bureau, they still maintained secret sentries stationed in various locations throughout the Northern Dynasty, and even a few in the Southern Dynasty. The capital alone must house several hundred members of the Zuoye Guard. A few hundred ordinary people were nothing more than a mob, but Zuoye guards underwent rigorous training. A few hundred of them represented the best of the best. If Tsway Boo-qoo managed to summon those guards here, then no matter what Yang Yuan wished to do, surely this would give him pause. Tsway Boo-qoo noticed Rong Qing's confused expression and explained, Before the flood recedes, news will continue to travel slowly. Even if I summoned my people, they would have to take a detour north of the city, just as we did when we arrived. Even if they rush here as quickly as possible, it will take them several days to reach us. By then, the time Yang Yuan gave us will be up, and it will be too late. Pei Jingzhe found this reasoning unconvincing. So unconvincing, it didn't sound like Tsway Boo-qoo at all. Tsway Boo-qoo, aren't you the one who always anticipates the enemy's moves and wins by surprise? Why are you now acting like you're blindfolded and bound? But Tsway Boo-qoo continued, disrupting his uncharitable thoughts. In the few sentences you said just now, you mentioned Xian twice. Tsway Boo-qoo looked at him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Do you miss her that much? No! Pei Jingzhe stuttered out a protest. Suddenly, he didn't know what to do with his hands. She misses you too. Pei Jingzhe's eyes lit up. I lied. Oh God, that was... He stared at Tsway Boo-qoo. Sorry. He stared as Tsway Boo-qoo continued. She's recovering and should be able to walk now. If you wish, perhaps you should go visit and help her resolve some of her concerns. Pei Jingzhe's cheeks were aflame, his eyes darting to the side. He'd been about to change the subject, but now he couldn't help wanting to know more. Since they'd first met in Liugong City, that celestial maiden in white had left a lasting impression on him. Unfortunately, despite his interest, Xian remained aloof. She was as cold as she was beautiful, and little Pei Langjuan was too thin-skinned to pester her. Since returning to the capital, whenever the Zhejian and Zuoye bureaus had needed to communicate, Pei Jingzhe had eagerly volunteered himself in hopes of exchanging a few more words with Xian. If no one gave him a push, he would continue spinning in circles for the rest of his life. Pei Jingzhe felt a surge of emotion. Go on, Tsway Boo-qoo urged again. With his face flushed red, Pei Jingzhe looked like a young boy brimming with affection but unsure how to express it. He excused himself and walked stiffly inside. Curious, Rong asked, What concerns does Xiao Nyangzi have? Since Shi and Guan Shanhai had returned, Rong had barely seen them. He felt there was something strange about Tsway Boo-qoo bringing Pei Jingzhe and Xian together now, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Tsway Boo-qoo smiled faintly. Why? Does Censor Rong also yearn for Xian? Not at all, not at all! Rong frantically waved his hands. It had only been a casual question. He pointed to the assassin still on the ground. What should we do with him? He answered with a bright laugh as Feng Xiao strode in. Cold, steamed, braised. You can prepare him any way you like. Chilly courtyard seemed to grow several degrees warmer. Tsway Boo-qoo blinked. He had to admit this fellow's beauty was truly exceptional, lovely enough to captivate all of creation. Simply standing there, he looked like a god. There was no need for him to speak. Indeed, it was best if he never spoke at all. Cui Xianxiang, Feng Xiao said, I couldn't help but notice your gaze lingered on me a bit longer than usual just now. Sure enough, that irritating voice spoiled the moment. Feng Xiao stopped at the threshold of the courtyard, expertly choosing his angle. Sweet-scented osmanthus flowers drifted onto his shoulders. The tilt of his fan and the motion of his wrist as he waved it were meticulously calculated, effortlessly elegant, yet carefully restrained to prevent the delicate flowers from falling to the ground. Would you like me to stand here for a bit longer so you can savor the view? That won't be necessary, Tsway Boo-qoo replied coldly. Next time, he thought, he wouldn't give this man so much as a second glance. Feng Xiao seemed to sense his thoughts, and a slight smirk curved his lips, as if mocking Tsway Boo-qoo's resolve. Tsway Boo-qoo looked down, irritated. I presume Deputy Chief Fung has returned with good news. Indeed, I have, Feng Xiao said with a smile. I did a charitable deed, and Li Yan's wife was most grateful. It turns out that good intentions really are rewarded. He tossed the bundle he was carrying onto the stone table. Rong was left utterly baffled by this exchange, but Tsway Boo-qoo merely sighed. He no longer expected this peacock with his tail raised sky-high to be capable of proper conversation. Rather than respond, he explained the situation to Rong. Guangtian County had embezzled significant amounts of grain for 3 consecutive years. It was impossible that they'd erased all traces of their deeds. Huang Lue had likely been silenced because he knew too much. Perhaps he'd even had key evidence. Though he was dead, whatever records he'd kept wouldn't simply vanish. They would be transferred to another conspirator, such as Li Yan or Wu Yi. People's hearts were often surprisingly predictable. Just as Yang Yuan had used Huang Lue while keeping a wary eye on him, Huang Lue's death had sounded the alarm for Li Yan and others. They would surely scramble to secure some evidence, either to leverage against Yang Yuan or to ensure their own safety. No matter how perfect a plan might be, there would always be vulnerabilities. The more intelligent the planner, the more contingencies they would prepare for. Tsway Boo-qoo wasn't concerned about them overthinking. On the contrary, he feared they wouldn't think enough. As long as the enemy had a weakness, there was still a chance for them to turn the tide. They'd learned Li Yan was keeping a mistress outside his home. His wife had a fierce temper, so he didn't dare let his family know and had concealed the affair from everyone. If Feng Xiao didn't use this knowledge to incite chaos, he simply wouldn't be able to live with himself. Via the Li family servants, he discreetly passed evidence of Li Yan's infidelity to his wife Li He, including the address of the house he'd purchased for his mistress. Despite her fury, Lady He had remained surprisingly level-headed. Rather than reacting immediately, she waited until Li Yan went out to visit his mistress there, then burst in and caught him in the act. She chased both the mistress and Li Yan through the courtyard with a rolling pin, startling the neighbors and creating a terrific scene. Li Yan, overwhelmed with guilt, had begged Lady He for forgiveness. She dismissed his pleas and ordered the servants to turn the manor upside down. Li Yan grew so furious he almost fainted. When he gathered his courage and attempted to reason with his wife, she struck him on the head with her rolling pin so hard he passed out cold. Evidence of Li Yan pampering his mistress was everywhere in the manor, including the many gifts he'd showered upon her. Upon seeing these, Lady He's anger intensified. She ordered the servants to ransack the place, smashing what they could and confiscating whatever gold, silver, and jewelry they found. Meanwhile, Deputy Chief Fung sat in the rafters, watching the mayhem unfold. He had a perfect view of the Li family servants turning the house inside out, allowing him to spot everything Li Yan might have concealed there related to the grain. It was obvious Li Yan doted on his mistress and feared his wife more than he respected her. When people had secrets to hide, they often concealed them where they themselves felt most comfortable, believing these were the places of great safety. Cui Buqu and Feng Xiao understood this well, which was why they'd chosen the manor as their first target. But nothing was certain. If they found no clues there, they would have to turn their attention to Wu Yi. Fortunately, this time, their guess was correct. Feng Xiao untied the knot on the bundle, freeing several scrolls, which tumbled off the table. There, under the clear blue sky, the scrolls unfurled, revealing their contents to the half-conscious assassin. The man's eyes went wide in disbelief, and a trickle of blood slid from his nose. Apparently, he was an assassin with a pure and innocent heart. The images on the scrolls were portrayed with exquisite lines and a vibrant array of colors. They depicted myriad scenes, from folding screens in manors to grape trellises in courtyards, from carriages to bustling brothels to taverns that teemed with onlookers. The paintings featured men and women of every sort, all engaged in various intimate acts, some bashful, some wild, some coy, some fiercely resistant. There seemed to be no limit to the painter's imagination. Rong stood dumbfounded as he pointed at the paintings, stammering, This... Tsway Boo-qoo said nothing. This was the first time he'd ever felt so ignorant and uninformed in his life. Feng Xiao was laughing, proudly flaunting his spoils. What do you think? Admit it, even you're shocked. Tsway Boo-qoo's face was expressionless. After crouching in the rafters for half a day, this is the key clue you found? Chapter 142. Feng Xiao looked back at him, the picture of innocence. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. You've strayed from the path of enlightenment, Cui Xiancheng. He tapped the paintings with his fan. On the surface, they look like erotic paintings, but in fact, they are hiding something much more meaningful. On hearing these words, the assassin fell into deep thought. If these weren't ordinary erotic paintings, what kind of extraordinary paintings were they? Could there be some profound martial arts form hidden within those poses? If I'd discovered those paintings earlier, could I have escaped the fate of an assassin and embarked on the path of a martial arts master? I don't think so. Feng Xiao had no idea his casual words had prompted such soul-searching, but unlike the assassin and Qing, who was likewise shocked beyond words, Tsway Boo-qoo lived up to his reputation. He hadn't been led astray by Feng Xiao, and after a moment's silence, he discovered a hint within those lurid scenes. The faces of the men depicted were all, without exception, the same. Did Xian hire someone to paint him and his mistress enjoying themselves? Clever. Feng Xiao struck his palm with his fan. I told you, they're not ordinary erotic paintings. Custom erotic paintings featuring oneself as the subject. It was certainly a niche interest. Xian had looked very serious and proper when they met him. Who could have known he was so broad-minded behind closed doors? Did you see where they took these scrolls from? Tsway Boo-qoo asked. Feng Xiao smiled. As expected, you've cut to the heart of the matter. The paintings were packed in a box, and the box was hidden beneath the floor tile beneath the bed. The tile had been covered in heavy boxes, all of them filled with gold and silver jewelry. Xian's salary would never allow him to accumulate so much wealth, even if he worked for another 20 years. Tsway Boo-qoo pondered this. These paintings are shameful, but they're not valuable. He hid the worthless pictures in the safest place, but left the more valuable gold and silver jewelry in the open. Strange, to say the least. I agree. After his wife knocked him out, I stayed until Xian woke up. What do you think was the first thing he did when he woke? Tsway Boo-qoo raised his eyes and looked at Feng Xiao. When Tsway Boo-qoo focused on a person, his eyes were particularly bright, sharp and cold, yet with a hidden sentimentality to them, like flowing spring waters concealed beneath ice and snow. Feng Xiao had only meant to take a single look, but found himself taking an additional 2 or 3. It wasn't until Tsway Boo-qoo raised an inquisitive brow that he coughed lightly and continued. When Xian woke up, he didn't look at the gold and silver scattered on the ground, nor did he run around to find out how much his property had been stolen by his wife's servants. He went straight for the box containing the erotic paintings. Lady He thought he was still attached to them and became so furious she chased him out again. Feng Xiao clicked his tongue. You should have seen it. It was quite the commotion. Records. Tsway Boo-qoo ignored Feng Xiao's gloating and said succinctly, These paintings are the records we're looking for. They took the records! Xian wailed. Wu Yi looked at Lian's bruised and swollen face. His nose was leaking snot. Wu Yi moved a little further away, then tossed over a handkerchief and said in disgust, Wipe it! Xian couldn't have cared less. He was in a full-blown panic over losing something so important. I checked everywhere. The servants refused to admit they took them. They're a pile of worthless paintings. Even if they stole them, they couldn't sell them. What in heaven's name did they do with them? Wu Yi sneered. Who told you to hide such an important thing in erotic paintings? And you kept them locked away even more securely than the gold and silver. Doesn't that make it obvious they're valuable? How could I have known Lady He would bring so many people? Xian wept piteously. Any normal thief would never have found them. What do we do now? You're the one who said we should keep the records to blackmail Yang Yuan. Well, Yang Yuan will be fine, and we'll be the ones in hot water. Pull yourself together, Wu Yi said coldly. What does it matter if they find the location in the records? The governor has planned for everything. They went to Qixia Villa, and you saw what happened there. So what if the Zoya Bureau stands behind Rongting? Even the most powerful dragon can't defeat a snake in its own garden. As long as the governor doesn't wish for them to find anything, they won't. For a moment, Xian was stunned. His befuddled expression, coupled with his 2 black eyes, looked exceedingly ridiculous, but his appearance was the least of his worries. Do you know something? He asked hurriedly. What did Yang Yuan, no, the governor, say to you? Just before you arrived, I paid him a call. I told him we could rest easy. Perhaps Wu Yi was in a good mood. Despite looking down on the cowardly deputy magistrate Li Yan, he poured him a cup of wine. In a few days, everything will be tied up neatly. Li Yan became only more confused. Neatly? How can it be neat? Even if they don't find the grain stores, doesn't Huang Lue's death indicate some sort of foul play? The governor said he'll ensure they take all the blame, but it can't be that simple. It all hinges on whether His Majesty believes him and whether or not the court believes him. And if neither the censor nor anyone backing him is alive to testify? Wu Yi asked darkly. Li Yan trembled. His eyes were so swollen he could hardly open them. Even trying with all his might, he could only widen them a crack. Through those cracks, he saw that Wu Yi's smile had become sinister. What are you proposing? What can you do with no guts? At least Huang Lue had the courage to play double agent. This Li bastard sniveled and cried like the sky was falling when his paperwork was stolen. He was more useless than a vengeful woman. Wu Yi cursed him inwardly, yet his expression remained amiable as he pushed the wine across the table to Li Yan. It's not what I'm proposing. It's what the governor's proposing. What does that mean? Li Yan said suspiciously. Rongqing's memorial will never be delivered. As for the Tsway Bureau, even if Tsway Boo-qoo files a complaint, we have people in the capital who will smooth things over. Tsway Boo-qoo has the trust of the Empress, but the governor is a Yang. If we didn't have allies in the capital, could our operation have gone as smoothly as it has? The only new variable this time is Tsway Boo-qoo. If Rongqing had come alone, this would have long been resolved. Wu Yi paused before continuing confidently. As for the other members of the Tsway Bureau, we needn't worry about them. The governor has made plans to silence them permanently. It's all over once you're dead. At that point, right or wrong is determined by others. Li Yan took in Wu Yi's confident expression and said nothing. Wu Yi hadn't been like this 2 days ago. He'd been just as anxious as Li Yan, just as terrified that their crimes would be exposed and that Yang Yuan would make them scapegoats. Yet suddenly, he seemed almost a different person. The only possible explanation was that he knew something Li Yan did not. Tsway Boo-qoo was the Empress's trusted aide, while the Tsway Bureau served as her teeth and claws. But Wu Yi had insinuated that none of this mattered to Yang Yuan at all. Li Yan had thought that since the chief of the Tsway Bureau had come in person, he must have martial experts at his side. Although Yang Yuan held immense power within Guangqian Commandery, he might not have the charisma to attract his own experts and annihilate Tsway Boo-qoo in a single strike. Unless there was a greater power behind Yang Yuan. A larger, more complicated organization, far beyond Li Yan's imagination. Li Yan felt a chill run up his spine. He snatched up the cup of wine and downed it in a gulp, hoping it would calm his nerves. But as the wine slid down his throat, his heart raced faster. Did the governor say when the dust will settle? Wu Yi held out 2 fingers. Within 2 days? Wu Yi smiled mysteriously. The paintings have no inner layers. There's nothing hidden in the scroll either. Then the key must be within the images themselves. Had anyone opened the door at this moment, they would have thought they'd entered some low-class brothel by mistake. The tables, floor, and walls were all plastered with erotic paintings. Unfortunately, no beautiful women graced the room, but 2 men. They sat facing each other, expressions stern as they carefully examined the paintings. Or, more precisely, Tsway Boo-qoo looked stern. Feng Xiao would never stand if he could sit, and never sit if he could lie down. He reclined against a plump cushion, one leg drawn up as he admired the paintings he'd found in Li Yan's mistress's residence. Honestly, where did he get the idea? If I were Li Yan, I would never think of hiding account records in dirty paintings. Then no tigers will chase you all over the yard any time soon, Tsway Boo-qoo said without looking up. Feng Xiao laughed. I didn't expect Cui Buqu to love them so much he'd be unwilling to put them down. If I'd known you liked this sort of thing, I'd have sent you a heap of them. You could look to your heart's content." "If you were in the painting, I wouldn't just like it," Tsway Boo-qoo retorted. "I'd give copies to the entire Tswoye Bureau. Everyone would get one, guaranteed." Feng Xiao nodded. "And what if the other face were yours?" "And what if the other face were yours?" Tsway Boo-qoo gave him a look that said, "Would you like to die standing or lying down?" and spoke coldly. "I know where the records are hidden." Feng Xiao perked up, no longer invested in their bickering. "Where?" "Right here." Tsway Boo-qoo pointed to the drawings in front of him. "It's signed 3rd year of the Kai Huang era, 21st of the 12th month. That date is in the future. Why would Lian sign a date 2 months in advance? If you look at the painting again, you see these two people copulating in the wild. There's a mountain in the distance and a villa halfway up the slope. Isn't that Qisha Villa?" Feng Xiao almost fell to the ground laughing at how seriously Tsway Boo-qoo said copulating in the wild. Before Chief Tsway could make any vicious remarks, he tucked away his smile and took a serious look at the painting. "You think the date represents an amount of grain?" "At least one of the numbers does. We've been to Qisha Villa, so we can recognize it. This painting is the easiest to interpret. As for the rest..." Tsway Boo-qoo looked around the room. "I can identify 3 more places at the moment. Fung Yuan Tavern, Zhao's Tea House, and the villa belonging to the Ding family. Identifying the rest would probably require someone familiar with all the pavilions and houses in the streets and alleys of Guangqiang County. But we don't have that much time. The 3rd one, the Ding Villa, is on the southern outskirts of the city. The area's flooded, so we can eliminate that one. That leaves only Fung Yuan Tavern and Zhao's Tea House." "How did you recognize those 2? asked Feng Xiao curiously. Tsway Boo-qoo pointed to his own forehead with a slender finger. "Before I arrived, I looked at a map of Guangqiang County and roughly memorized all the landmarks in the city. On my arrival, I walked the streets, but I can only remember these 2 locations." Merely reading a map and seeing the actual place one time had been sufficient for Tsway Boo-qoo to match the names with their respective locations and commit them firmly to memory. Remembering even a single place was impressive. Few others, Feng Xiao included, would have recalled even that much. But the Tswoye Bureau didn't need others. One Tsway Boo-qoo was enough. Feng Xiao had witnessed this ability of Tsway Boo-qoo's countless times by now, yet each time he found himself struck by surprise and a little admiration. The things Tsway Boo-qoo paid most attention to were the details others often ignored. Those details might seem useless to most, but there was always a chance they'd come in handy, and sometimes they determined the difference between victory and defeat. "Fung Yuan Tavern or Zhao's Tea House. Pick one," Tsway Boo-qoo said. Feng Xiao scowled. "Why me? I've worked for days pretending to be Li Shise. I pretended to be someone's grandson, fought Xiao Lu at Qisha Villa, and now you want me to be your errand boy?" "Then should I go?" "I don't really care," Tsway Boo-qoo said evenly. "I'm merely worried that if I don't die from fatigue on the way, I'll be felled by a single strike once I arrive." Feng Xiao sneered. "Don't try that with me. Get your Xian to go." "Xian is injured." "She's injured, not missing her arms and legs. She can handle one more fight. If she can't win, she can simply run away. You cherish your beloved subordinates so, but you won't spare a mote of concern for me? Is that it?" Without warning, Feng Xiao leaned in, catching Tsway Boo-qoo off guard. He was so close, Tsway Boo-qoo could feel the warm puffs of his breath. Tsway Boo-qoo tried to retreat, but Feng Xiao grabbed the back of his head and held him firmly in place. Their eyes met. Slowly, Tsway Boo-qoo blinked. The jut of his throat bobbed, the motion so small it was almost imperceptible. Before Tsway Boo-qoo could get angry, Feng Xiao laughed and pulled back first. "Tsway Boo-qoo, you're blushing. It's hot in here," said Tsway Boo-qoo expressionlessly. Feng Xiao brushed aside his excuse. "You really are fascinated by my beauty. You're only pretending you're not. I'm not. Pick one. I'll send Guan Shanhai to the other. You'd rather send Guan Shanhai than Qiao, even though his injuries are more serious? Do you really treasure her that much? Or could it be... Feng Xiao drawled the words, heavy with implication. That you suspect her. Tsway Boo-qoo said nothing. Feng Xiao smacked his fan into his palm. Every time you show that blank expression, I know I've got it right. I've never thought you'd suspect her. Since when? Before they'd left the capital, Tsway Boo-qoo had entered the palace to meet Empress Dugu and inform her of his investigations regarding the 13 floors of Yunhai. When Empress Dugu asked him what help he needed, he'd asked for a person. Everyone thought Guan Shanhai had been forced upon him by the Empress, and that his presence proved she didn't trust Tsway Boo-qoo. No one had guessed that Tsway Boo-qoo had asked for Guan Shanhai himself. Despite this misunderstanding, neither he nor Guan Shanhai had clarified things to anyone. The misunderstanding was precisely what they needed. Feng Xiao had also originally drawn the same conclusion, but he'd quickly discarded it. From what he knew of Empress Dugu's personality, not to mention her trust in Tsway Boo-qoo, she didn't need to control her officials and aides via such ham-fisted methods. Guan Shanhai wasn't here to monitor Tsway Boo-qoo. He was here to monitor Qiao Xian. Chapter 143. When did you begin to suspect her? Ever since you told me on Mount Tianan that there was a traitor close to me. Feng Xiao arched a brow. I thought you concluded it was Fan Yuan. I did it first, said Tsway Boo-qoo. Fan Yuan is most familiar with my past, which is why the 13 floors of Yunhai set that trap for me and Boling. But I gradually discovered that they not only knew my past, but also my current whereabouts, where I was going, what I was doing. The 13 floors of Yunhai always seemed able to predict where I'd be and lay traps before I arrived. They knew your plans before you went to Qixia Villa. Tsway Boo-qoo nodded. No matter how clever Xiao Lu is, he's not a god. It's impossible for him to know every detail of my movements. The only explanation is a traitor close to me. And the traitor can't be an ordinary warrior guard because the enemy is practically following my every footstep. But that doesn't prove it's Xian. It doesn't, Tsway Boo-qoo agreed. That's why I took her and Guan Shanhai with me on this trip. I came to Guangtian Commandery in secret. Other than my 2 guards, only Empress Dugu knew. Even Zhongqing and his attendant only learned the news just before setting out. When Zhongqing arrived in Guangtian County, he encountered obstacles at every turn. He was deceived and ambushed by Huang Lue and the others, and even accused of murder. His attendant, Xiao Liu, also died, which shows Zhongqing cannot be from Xiao Liu's faction. Guan Shanhai was handicapped by me. His family had been with the army for 3 generations. He has little connection to the capital and a clean background. No matter how superhuman Xiao Liu is, his reach can't possibly extend to Guan Shanhai. That leaves only Qiao Xian. It must be her. She's been secretly sending messages to our enemies, passing my whereabouts to them and facilitating their attacks. Feng Xiao chuckled. She doesn't know you have a card up your sleeve. She's had countless opportunities to attack you, but she never took them. She's still sentimental about your relationship. I was already on guard against her, so I never gave her the chance. Tsway Boo-qoo said placidly. If she wants to kill me, she won't succeed. I never entrust my back to those I suspect. Feng Xiao clapped his hands. Now there's the ever-decisive Tsway Boo-qoo. I wonder. He leaned forward on his elbows and stared at Tsway Boo-qoo. Would you entrust your back to me? Their gazes collided. Tsway Boo-qoo couldn't avoid it. They were so close he could see his reflection in Feng Xiao's eyes, almost filling them. There was a moment of silence. Tsway Xianqiang, did your lordship find... Zhongqing rushed in, but his voice died as he noticed the strange atmosphere in the room. They both turned their heads, and Zhongqing forced a stiff smile. The 2 gentlemen can please continue chatting. I'll come back later. Without waiting for them to reply, he whirled around and left, fleeing like someone had set fire to his tail. Feng Xiao reached out and grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo's chin, slowly turning his gaze from Zhongqing back to himself. Tsway Boo-qoo unceremoniously slapped the back of his hand hard, and missed. Feng Xiao had pulled his hand back faster. Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. Slowly, he said, I will never entrust my back to an arrogant, conceited narcissist. Feng Xiao laughed aloud. Tsway Boo-qoo, you can list so many of my virtues. Doesn't that prove you care for me? And that I value you? Fungar, have you ever heard this saying? I'm all ears. The first to ask loses. Feng Xiao nodded. You're saying you originally wanted to ask me the same thing. I knew it. Even though you're a mean-spirited man who acts aloof and detached and never takes my feelings seriously, you still have to bend in the face of a singularly elegant young master like myself. Tsway Boo-qoo gave him an incredulous look. How can a person as shameless as you exist? Feng Xiao sighed. You are jealous of my grace, envious of my unfettered freedom. The jealous and envious Tsway Boo-qoo looked like he'd been force-fed a rotten egg and made to swallow the foul thing lodged in his throat. The corners of his mouth twitched as he said, sincere. Fungar, sometimes there's something I really want to do to you. Fill me up, said Feng Xiao. Molest me? Degrade me? Turn you mute with poison. Your face by itself is appetizing enough. Feng Xiao laughed. That won't work. If I'm mute, who can match you in a battle of wits? Shouw could, said Tsway Boo-qoo. A scoundrel who skulks around in the dark, refusing to show himself? Feng Xiao pressed his lips together. Can a firefly's glow outshine the moon? If you knew Xian was working for him, why didn't you do something about it? Are you letting out the line to catch the big fish? Tsway Boo-qoo was silent a moment. 4 years ago, when we met, she was wretched and miserable. She might have been pretending, said Feng Xiao. She had many opportunities to attack me when we were alone together along the way, but she never did. To make it more believable, Feng Xiao said. If you can't bear to do it, allow me. No need. I'll give her a chance and let her choose, Tsway Boo-qoo said. Feng Xiao sighed. Tsway Boo-qoo, a cold man with a warm heart. Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. Feng Yuan-tian, a flower in love with its own petals. I'd prefer you to describe me as a dashing man of grace. Feng Xiao snapped open his fan and rose. I like drinking wine, not tea, so I choose Feng Yuan Tavern. But what's your next move? They've likely made preparations at these 2 places. We have no idea if it's truly a new lead or another trap. Tsway Boo-qoo, the master strategist, surely you're not sending Guan Shanhai and me into the enemy camp by ourselves, are you? Tsway Boo-qoo shrugged. I have no cards left. Xiao has me at the end of my tether. Why else would I ask to borrow Pei Jingzhe? I even hope to ask you to mobilize some Jiejian Bureau Eagle Riders to help us get through this. I'm sorry, but there's no manpower left at the Jiejian Bureau either. Otherwise, why would I, the deputy chief himself, make a personal appearance? Feng Xiao shot him a penetrating look, as if he wished to pry into Tsway Boo-qoo's innermost thoughts. It's not like you, Tsway Boo-qoo, to leave yourself no recourse. Tsway Boo-qoo sighed. Yang Yuan is getting restless. Xiao is worried about dragging things out. They're sure to make a move within the next 2 days, and it's too late to call the Zhuoye guard from elsewhere. Even the wisest man, considering 1,000 possibilities, can still make a mistake. Against this powerful enemy, I might even pay with my poor, insignificant life. Feng Xiao also sighed, his gaze sympathetic. Cui Langjun's situation is truly tragic this time. No less tragic than yours, Tsway Boo-qoo said sorrowfully. The 2 sly foxes looked at each other, one sitting, one standing, both wearing the same pained smile. Another room. Another 2 people. One wore a blank expression almost identical to Tsway Boo-qoo's as she stared at the newcomer. The other shrank further into himself the more she stared, at a loss for what to do. You seem unhappy, Pei Jingzhe said carefully. Xian finally spoke. When did you get here? Pei Jingzhe breathed a quiet sigh of relief. I came with my lord. He asked me to assist Cui Xiancheng. Someone tried to assassinate him just now, but I stopped him. Who sent them? She asked, her aloof expression faltering. Is the Lord Chief all right? He's fine, but since the enemy didn't succeed, they're certain to try again. he answered honestly. I'm afraid I can only do so much with my martial arts. Next time, he might not be so lucky. Without thinking, Xian rose from the bed and put on her boots. Pei Jingzhe hurried to stop her. Now that my lord is here, all you need to do is rest and recover. Of course, with Feng Xiao here, why should I worry? Xian said with a self-depreciating laugh. There was obviously another implication beneath her words. Pei Jingzhe couldn't help but observe. You seem extremely prejudiced against the deputy chief. Xian pursed her lips and said nothing, as if this action alone was sufficient to express her endless disgust. Blinking, Pei Jingzhe cast about for something else to say. After my last trip with him, he almost docked my pay. Sure enough, Xian frowned. Is the Zhejian Bureau so poor they need to cut their subordinates' pay? Pei Jingzhe smiled. It wasn't a pay cut. It's because I performed poorly and my lord punished me for it. Feng Xiao is so stingy, Xian muttered. Pei Jingzhe smiled again. He often threatens such things, but he almost never follows through. I consider him a father as much as a master. Without him, there's much I would not have learned. Maybe I'd still be a foolish, confused boy who knows nothing about the world. What about you? How did you join the Tsway Bureau and start working under Tsway Boo-qoo? He's never given his trust easily, so those who earn it must be outstanding. He didn't know which of his words had struck Xian, but she immediately froze. So all we can do is sit back and wait for them to make a move? Feng Xiao had departed for the tavern, while Pei Jingzhe had disappeared to speak with Xian. Rong, Qing, and Tsway Boo-qoo sat under a tree playing chess. The former was restless and absent-minded. After a few matches, he couldn't resist asking this question. The relay station was very quiet. It was the middle of the day, yet the building felt empty of people. No, Tsway Boo-qoo shook his head. Rong Qing's hopes rose. They're the wolf, and we're the rabbit. As Rong Qing stared, Tsway Boo-qoo amended. That's not right either. Together, you and I make 2 rabbits. Rong Qing smiled bitterly. I've already written the memorial and sent someone to deliver it with all haste. Have you prepared a copy? No. Why? Rong Qing asked in confusion. What's wrong? Your memorial will never arrive, Cui Buqu said sympathetically. If we're lucky enough to survive the next few days, you'll have to write another one. It would have been easier if you'd made a copy. Rong Qing was speechless. He stared at Tsway Boo-qoo for a long time, then couldn't help saying, Why are you so sure my memorial won't arrive? I even specially gave the courier an extra letter. Once he arrives in the capital, he can go to my residence and collect a bonus. He'll rush there as... He never finished the sentence. Rong Qing heard a swift rush of air and watched in horror as an arrow whistled over the wall and nailed itself into a nearby pillar. The entire front third of the arrow was buried in the wood, a thick letter attached to the shaft. Rong Qing recognized the memorial he'd sealed and handed it to the courier himself. The fletchling of the arrow was dull, and the letter was stained with blood. A lock of hair was attached to it. Rong Qing whipped his head back around to look at Tsway Boo-qoo. This is just the beginning, Tsway Boo-qoo offered. Rong Qing didn't know what to say. Chapter 144. Xian still remembered the rainy night when she'd first met Tsway Boo-qoo. She'd just been expelled from her sect and had nowhere to go. As she trudged down the road, she saw a lantern shining bright and warm through the dark night. The lantern belonged to a relay station on the outskirts of the city, meant for travelers who arrived after nightfall and had to wait for the gates to open in the morning. Beneath the lantern sat a small stall selling hot soup. Business was slow tonight. Besides the stall owner, there was only one other person. The man looked sickly, his movements slow. He sat quietly, looking at the hot soup on the table, lost in thought. When he raised his head, he happened to meet her probing eyes. Through the thick curtain of rain, Xian heard the man say, "Would you like a bowl of hot soup?" "All right," she replied. Many in the Tsway Bureau laughed at her over-dependence on Tsway Boo-qoo. Some even speculated she was secretly in love with Chief Tsway. Xian had scoffed at the rumors. She didn't need to explain herself. Tsway Boo-qoo had helped her when she was at her most desperate, taken her in, taught her, and made her Xian of the Tsway Bureau instead of Xian, the traitor, at whom everyone spat and cursed. If Feng Xiao was the person Pei Jingzhe most revered, then Tsway Boo-qoo was the same for Xian. In gratitude for his guidance and tutelage, Xian was willing to brave fire and flood. But there were some forces even she was helpless to refuse. 4 years ago, she hadn't anticipated how terrifying that helplessness would become. Things had spiraled out of her control, like a horse throwing off its reins. Once it broke free, it would never be easily restrained again. She had thought she was on a mountain road, and that despite the intermittent crags and bumps, it would take her steadily upward. Only now did she realize she'd been wrong. The road had led her to a cliff, and she was standing at the precipice. The road back was cut off. She could neither advance nor retreat, and didn't know what to do. The abyss was awaiting for her below, with its bloody maw stretched wide, ready to engulf her at any moment. "Qiao, what did you say?" Xian murmured, returning to her senses. "I said, if there's something on your mind, you don't have to tell me, but why not talk to Tsway Boo-qoo? He has lots of ideas. I'm sure he'd help you find a solution." Perhaps because he had an arrogant and insolent boss like Feng Xiao, Pei Jingzhe was especially gentle and patient. Xian lowered her lashes. "What if even the Lord Chief can't help me?" Pei Jingzhe blinked. He'd begun to understand why Tsway Boo-qoo had sent him here. It's not too late to make amends. Rong hadn't anticipated that Tsway Boo-qoo's prediction would come true so quickly. The relay station seemed to have an invisible boundary drawn around it. The enemy outside hadn't stormed in just yet, but they would do everything possible to kill them from without. The same afternoon the blood-stained memorial was returned undelivered. 4 assassins snuck into the relay station's courtyard. They were men of some skill. Had Rong been alone, he would have died several times over. Luckily, Pei Jingzhe led 2 eagle riders to capture 3 of their attackers, and though the 4th man escaped, it was with serious injuries. He probably wouldn't survive for long. In the evening, someone set a fire in the backyard. While everyone was fighting the fire, their assailant took advantage of the chaos to poison the food in the kitchen. Tsway Boo-qoo caught him in the act and had him seized. The 2 consecutive attacks sent people into a panic. Tsway Boo-qoo dismissed all the servants, leaving only the people from the Zuoye and Jiejian bureaus. The relay station became quiet again. Although Rong was frightened, Tsway Boo-qoo, his superior in rank and authority, remained unruffled. His calm was infectious, and Rong gradually regained his composure. Day passed into night. Feng Xiao had yet to return, and there was no sign of Guan Shanhai. Pei Jingzhe gradually began to feel the pressure, like a noose tightening around them. A greater storm was brewing. As the last dusky clouds of the horizon were engulfed by darkness, the world welcomed a moonless night, lit only by the flicker of lamps. When Pei Jingzhe entered the main hall, he found Tsway Boo-qoo sitting by the fire, warming himself and reading a book. Surprisingly, he seemed truly absorbed. He wasn't holding the book just for show. Pei Jingzhe watched him turn a page, his lips curving slightly in amusement. "Is Tsway reading something funny?" Pei Jingzhe approached the brazier, but found himself sweating almost immediately. He took a few steps back and chose a seat farther away. Although it was autumn, the weather was still mild. Most people didn't need a brazier in these temperatures, but Tsway Boo-qoo feared both the heat and the cold, and he felt more comfortable next to the fire. "It's a short classic about 2 brothers fighting over a wife," he answered. Pei Jingzhe couldn't believe Tsway Boo-qoo was in the mood to read at a time like this. "Sir," he blurted, "my lord has been gone most of the day. When do you think he will be back? Is he in danger?" Tsway Boo-qoo shook his head. Pei Jingzhe was about to breathe a sigh of relief when Tsway Boo-qoo followed up with, "Of course he's in danger." "Then why did you shake your head?" Pei Jingzhe's mouth twitched. "I shook my head because I don't know when he will return. you can comfort yourself with this. The good die young, while the wicked live to 1,000. Pei Jingzhe was speechless. He wanted to argue that his lord was a good person, but he realized that by Tsway Boo-qoo's logic, he'd be cursing him to die before his time. Tsway Boo-qoo and Feng Xiao were nemeses forced to share a narrow road. When they were together, they couldn't be comfortable unless they were needling each other. Pei Jingzhe had long grown numb to their antics. Sir, there's something I don't understand. None of the assassins they've sent have been especially skillful. This doesn't seem like the 13 floors of Yuan Hai's style. Shouldn't they have much more potent methods? Or have I overestimated them? You haven't overestimated them. Tsway Boo-qoo finally put down the book. Those assassins were not from the 13 floors of Yuan Hai. What do you mean? Tsway Boo-qoo raised 2 fingers. Yang Yuan and the 13 floors are not working as closely as it appears. Since their arrival in Guangqian Commandery, the enemy had made several moves. They'd held a banquet to win over Zhongqing, then killed Huang Lue preemptively and blamed it on the censor. They'd severely wounded Guan Shanhai at Qixia Villa, stalled Feng Xiao, and even tampered with Tsway Boo-qoo's array, then sent a series of incompetent assassins, one after another. Sometimes the moves were brilliant, outmaneuvering Tsway Boo-qoo and his allies at every turn. Yet at other times they were painfully mediocre, even foolish. It was clear these were not the works of the same mind. Yang Yuan and Xiao are cooperating, but there's no master-subordinate relationship here. Yang Yuan has his own plans and won't obey Xiao without question, while Xiao is keeping a low profile and waiting for the right opportunity. He's exceptionally patient. He either doesn't attack at all, or he holds nothing back. The assassins must therefore be Yang Yuan's doing. We're at a disadvantage now, he continued. But Yang Yuan doesn't know that. He's unsure what cards we have up our sleeve, so he's testing us to find our limits. Once he's confident we can't retaliate, he'll swoop in to annihilate us. He won't allow us to return to the capital alive. But just because Yang Yuan takes action doesn't mean Xiao will too. Yang Yuan is itching to get started, but Xiao is in no hurry. He's still our most dangerous enemy. Now Pei Jingzhe understood the strange feeling he couldn't put a finger on before. In just a few words, Tsway Boo-qoo had smoothed away the doubts he couldn't articulate. So we should wait for Xiao to act? Tsway Boo-qoo shook his head. Xiao is still biding his time because Yang Yuan has yet to make his killing move. Yang Yuan will definitely exhaust his strength to bury me here. My lord hasn't returned yet, and Guan Shanhai is missing. Pei Jingzhe looked grave. The 2 warrior guards who came with you have also been sent off. Now only I, Xian, and 2 eagle riders remain in this relay station. We can handle 5 or 6 assassins, but Yang Yuan might have far more than that. If he sends a dozen, things will get difficult. Tsway Boo-qoo laughed. A dozen? Now you're underestimating Yang Yuan. He's been operating the Guangqian Commandery for 3 years. He used the grain provided by the court and the money from the prominent families here to fund a private army. He will have also benefited from his cooperation with Xiao. A few assassins, the fire. Those were all just tests. Yang Yuan might not be able to mobilize an entire county's worth of soldiers, but a few hundred people will be more than enough to besiege this small courtyard and lay waste to it. The longer Pei Jingzhe listened, the paler his face grew. Then, should I go search for my lord now? Tsway Boo-qoo smiled thinly. I'm afraid it's too late. He'd hardly finished when Pei Jingzhe heard a deep rumble like muffled thunder. It rolled in from the distance, but the final thunderclap never came. With the start, he realized that it wasn't thunder at all. It was the sound of mounted soldiers galloping toward them. From the sound alone, there were several hundred at least. On the battlefield, a few hundred soldiers would be engulfed in an instant, but those numbers were more than enough to surround a relay station and kill a handful of people. It was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Pei Jingzhe was an above-average martial artist and might even be considered a second-tier expert, but in the face of such a large force, Even he might not be able to flee safely, let alone bring Tsway Boo-qoo and Rong Qing out with him. Several methods of escape flashed through his mind and were promptly discarded. Tsui Xianxiang, we have two options. Either you can make a run for it while Xian and I protect you, or you can hide in the cellar with Censor Rong while we deal with him. You can come out once the coast is clear. Pei Jingzhe's voice quavered slightly with nerves. The thunder of hooves grew slower and slower. The soldiers would be outside the door at any moment. No, Tsway Boo-qoo said. That's too cowardly. It lacks boldness. Pei Jingzhe thought he was going mad. At a time like this, preserving your life should be good enough. What boldness do you need? Aloud, he asked, exasperated. Then do you have any better ideas? Tsway Boo-qoo cocked his head and thought for a moment. How about I use my peerless grace to make them kneel and beg for mercy? Face blank, Pei Jingzhe wondered for a moment if Tsway Boo-qoo was actually Feng Xiao in disguise. Someone pounded on the door, the sound shaking the whole building on this silent night. The doors of every house around the relay station were shut tight. No one was willing to lose their life for the sake of a little curiosity. Pei Jingzhe was so anxious his teeth were chattering. He was just about to drop everything and stuff Tsway Boo-qoo into the cellar with Rong Qing when Tsway Boo-qoo rose and smoothed out the wrinkles in his clothes. I jest. That's what your Oleander spirit would say. Let's go. Go where? Pei Jingzhe asked automatically. To welcome our guests. Rong Qing trailed after them without saying a word. He'd experienced all sorts of ups and downs over the past few days, enough stormy waves to make up for the past 20 years of smooth sailing. He'd gone from panic and terror to a calm that was almost numb. But his mind had also grown much clearer, and he was no longer prone to the same impulsivity. Xiao Liu's death had prompted him to think much more deviously about how to deal with the enemy. He was willing to give up decision-making power and let Tsway Boo-qoo give orders. In any case, even if he screamed his throat raw right now, no one would listen to him. Their enemy continued to pound on the door, seemingly about to break in at any moment. Outside, Yang Yuan was sitting high astride a horse. He raised a hand, and the banging on the door stopped. Tsway Boo-qoo, I know you're inside. As long as you surrender yourself, everyone else will be safe. He didn't need to shout. The night was so quiet he was certain Tsway Boo-qoo could hear him. The only reason he hadn't simply broken down the door was a fear of walking into Tsway Boo-qoo's traps. He'd heard much about the insidious Zhuoye bureau chief, but had never dealt with him directly. Many of the tales had come from the 13 floors of Yunhai themselves. At the thought of the 13 floors, Yang Yuan felt a spike of annoyance. Just as Tsway Boo-qoo had surmised, the relationship between Yang Yuan and the 13 floors was not that of a subordinate and a superior, but one of mutual cooperation. Bluntly, they were using each other. When the 13 floors of Yunhai had first approached him, they had taken a fancy to his restless ambition and proposed a grand plan for him. But Yang Yuan was wary of inhibiting his own plans and uninterested in becoming a puppet dancing on their strings. Thus, he had carefully negotiated a relationship of cooperation. In this way, he hoped to leverage the power of the 13 floors of Yunhai to pave a path for himself without becoming overly involved with them. But the members of the 13 floors weren't fools. Yang Yuan had flouted them one too many times. Since the day before yesterday, they'd cut off communications with him. Yang Yuan didn't know whether they would deal with Tsway Boo-qoo and Rong Qing. If he wanted them buried here, he had to do it himself. Behind Yang Yuan was Wu Yi on his horse. Li Yan had not appeared. He was fearful and weighed down by worries. But Wu Yi had more courage. From the moment he'd thrown in his lot with Yang Yuan, he had known he'd boarded a ship he could never step off. And after Huang Lue's death, he'd become even more certain that if he wished to survive this, he had to pray for smooth sailing for Yang Yuan. Governor, why not shoot some flaming arrows in first? Wu Yi suggested. Yang Yuan gave a slight nod. Wu Yi waved his men over and was about to give the order when the door of the relay station creaked open. Through the gap, they could see that the interior was bright with lamplight. The man they were all looking for, Tsway Boo-qoo, was sitting at a small table in the courtyard. A tea set was laid out before him, the cups filled and steaming. Tsway Boo-qoo raised his teacup and greeted Yang Yuan from his seat. The rain has stopped, and the flood should recede in a few days. Is Governor Yang interested in sharing some tea with me in celebration of heavens finally smiling upon us? Your lordship, don't fall into the trap, Wu Yi whispered hurriedly. He's trying to provoke you. Of course Yang Yuan had no intention of accepting his invitation. He sneered. Tsway Boo-qoo, chief of the Tsway Bureau, your reputation precedes you. It's a pity that you'll die here tonight. If you're trying to convince me I'm walking into an ambush, it's no use. He had no intention of listening to Tsway Boo-qoo's prattle. He raised a hand, and the archers flanking him climbed atop the walls. Instantly, dozens of arrows were aimed at Tsway Boo-qoo. When Yang Yuan's hand came down, the arrows would fly, and Tsway Boo-qoo would be no more. The doors surrounding the courtyard were tightly closed. Rong, Pei Jingzhe, and the rest sat inside looking at each other. Tsway Boo-qoo had forbidden them to come out into the courtyard. In a situation like this, it made no difference how many of them confronted the enemy, unless they were all martial artists on par with Feng Xiao. The man could go anywhere he pleased, ignoring the rain of arrows or forests of spears. But there was only one Feng Xiao. Listening to the voices outside, Rongqing's heart leapt into his throat. If he were Tsway Boo-qoo, what would he do to escape such a dangerous situation? He thought and thought, but came up completely empty. Tsway Boo-qoo had enough time to say 1 or 2 sentences at most. If he used them to appeal to the archers' consciences and tried to convince them to switch sides, he would die before he finished speaking. But what else could he do? Was there another way? Pei Jingzhe was also thinking hard. Could Tsway Boo-qoo be waiting for Feng Xiao and Guan Shanhai to return and launch a surprise attack? But that was impossible. Even if Feng Xiao rushed over this instant, he couldn't arrive in time to snatch Tsway Boo-qoo out from under the arrows bristling from the tops of walls. What card was Tsway Boo-qoo holding that he'd thrown away any chance of resistance or escape and instruct them to stay where they were? Surely he didn't believe he could save them by sacrificing himself. If Yang Yuan dared to kill the Tsway Bureau chief, the rest of them went without saying. Pei Jingzhe's eyes were closed, his forehead beaded with sweat. His palms were clammy, his face so twisted with nerves it hardly seemed human. He opened his eyes and looked at Xian and Rong. Their faces were ashen. Xian's jaw was clenched, her body tense as if she might charge outside at any moment. But because Tsway Boo-qoo had ordered her to stay put, and Pei Jingzhe had struck her acupoint for good measure, she remained silent. The 3 of them looked more wretched than Tsway Boo-qoo sitting outside, but none of them were in the mood to laugh at themselves. They stared at the closed window with such intensity their eyes were practically burning a hole in the paper. This was the critical moment. Tsway Boo-qoo had one shot. Chapter 145. Tsway Boo-qoo was besieged on all sides. He sat calmly under the stairs of the army, the steel arrows glinting bright above him, in the moment between life and death. He only had time to say 2 sentences, so that was what he did. The first was, "Have you visited the commandery prison lately?" Followed by, "When you set out, did you leave enough men to guard your study?" The first sentence made Yang Yuan frown. At the second, his eyes went wide with shock. His raised hand remained frozen in the air. "Governor!" Wu Yi urged him from behind. "What did you do?" Yang Yuan knew he should bring his hand down regardless and have Tsway Boo-qoo turned into a pincushion. But for some reason, he hesitated. "Governor!" Wu Yi was so anxious he yearned to grab Yang Yuan's hand and yank it down himself. "Tsway Boo-qoo!" Yang Yuan roared. Tsway Boo-qoo smiled. "Scared, Governor Yang?" The truly ambitious felt no fear. Power was their ultimate pursuit, even if it meant putting their own lives on the line. Liu Bang, the founder of the Han dynasty, was the greatest exemplar. When his political opponent Xiang Yu had kidnapped Liu Bang's father, wife, and children and threatened to boil them alive, Liu Bang had calmly responded by asking Xiang Yu to leave him a sip of the soup. Tsway Boo-qoo had initially thought Yang Yuan such a person. He had no children of his own and a discordant relationship with his wife, all in order to minimize his weaknesses and avoid being manipulated and threatened. But upon meeting him face to face, Tsway Boo-qoo knew at once that he'd overestimated him. The man might not care about continuing his family line, but he cared about himself very much. Yang Yuan was over 30 years old, with a short mustache and a neatly trimmed beard. Even on such a stormy night, his hair and clothes were meticulously groomed, as if he couldn't stand untidiness. His position among his men was also telling. Guards flanked him, but no one stood behind him. If he encountered any danger, he could quickly retreat into the circles of his guards to ensure his safety. Here was a person who both valued his appearance and cherished his life. He loved himself most of all, so a wife and children didn't matter. As long as he was well, that was enough. Governor Yang, I presume you only wanted to skim off some grain and sell it for a little profit. You never meant to go this far, did you? Tsway Boo-qoo said. The instant Yang Yuan failed to bring his hand down, Tsway Boo-qoo knew he'd found his weakness. Now he could turn the tide. If you'd only misappropriated a little rice, you could repent to His Majesty. The worst you would suffer is a dismissal and a whipping, but a revolt is different. You were using the 13 floors of Yuanhai, but you didn't know they were also using you. They've led you step by step into a trap, allowing the situation to escalate until you were pushed to the edge of the cliff. Now you have no choice but to do what they want. Kill him! Wu Yi roared. Kill this invalid! He's making up lies! What's so frightening about that? He charged forward with the blade in hand, raising it high and slashing toward Tsway Boo-qoo. Pei Jingzhe! Tsway Boo-qoo shouted. Almost before he said it, Pei Jingzhe was rushing out of the house. Wu Yi was far slower than an arrow and was quickly knocked to the ground. Pei Jingzhe pinned him down and set a blade to his neck. The archers on the wall should have shot Tsway Boo-qoo the moment Wu Yi charged, yet instead they were craning their necks to look behind them, their faces filled with surprise. Their formation quickly fell apart. In the darkness whence they'd come, pinpoints of light shone, though no one had seen them appear. They grew bigger and bigger, brighter and brighter, transforming from scattered sparks into clusters of flame. Shouts accompanied the lights, rolling toward them like rumbling thunder. The source of the commotion was a little distance away, growing no closer to the relay station, yet Yang Yuan's face went ashen. He knew where that howling, surging tide was heading, the commandery governor's residence. For 2 years now, you used the tax exemption donation policy to lie to the court. You conspired with wealthy households to share the spoils and made a handsome profit. Had you been willing to stop there, you wouldn't have found yourself in this disastrous situation. But the human heart is never content, is it? And this year, something unexpected happened. The rain was far heavier than anticipated. The court sent relief grain, but you were greedy and kept every sack. Tens of thousands were displaced. In their desperation, they flocked to the city and almost caused a riot. At the same time, the court sent a censor to oversee relief efforts. Terrified that the longer you waited, the more likely it was that you'd be exposed, you decided to finish what you'd started and kill the refugees. But there were too many for you to murder them all. You shut the remainder inside the prison. You planned to wait until after the censor left to finish the job, so you could pretend those civilians tragically drowned in the floods. With them dead, you wouldn't need to cough up the grain either, thus killing 2 birds with 1 stone. All would be well. Tsway Boo-qoo spoke rapidly, laying out Yang Yuan's plan as if he'd witnessed each step himself. Yet more horrifying than Tsway Boo-qoo's analysis was the reckless gambit he'd chosen. Along with the refugees, he'd also released the prisoners on death row who'd been mixed with them, leading them all to attack the commandery governor's residence. Yang Yuan had brought men here to kill Tsway Boo-qoo, yet now his own home was being destroyed. All those desperate prisoners and refugees needed was for someone to open the prison doors and shout a suggestion, perhaps that the residents had food, and that an imperial envoy would protect them if anything happened. They must have rushed to the residence in a frenzy to ransack the place. Tsway Boo-qoo's men would surely be among them, and in the study they'd find... The clamor rose around them, louder and louder. Citizens in their homes who'd been too afraid to come out now couldn't resist cracking open their windows and peeking outside. Howls split the air. Yang Yuan heard the sound of swords and spears clanging. The mob must have taken the prison guards' weapons. Yang Yuan had brought almost every guard and soldier with him, leaving only a few men to watch over the commandery governor's manor. He hadn't anticipated Tsway Boo-qoo would be ruthless enough to use this indirect approach to solve his predicament, hoping to draw Yang Yuan's army away from the relay station. If the governor's residence was destroyed, all the secrets he had hidden there would be destroyed with it. Yang Yuan's bloodshot eyes bulged. He glared viciously at Tsway Boo-qoo, as if staring down an enemy he'd sworn revenge on for killing his father. Do you know what will happen now that those refugees are released? All of Guangtian County will suffer thanks to this. Tsway Boo-qoo, do you intend to become the villain who brought calamity to Guangtian for your own selfish gain? Such absurd words, twisting truth into lies. Yet Yang Yuan shouted them with self-righteous conviction. The pain-stricken soldiers were whispering among themselves. None of them had any attention to spare for Yang Yuan's pompous bolstering. The scene in the distance grew more chaotic. Flames licked into the sky from the governor's residence, accompanied by thick, billowing smoke. Yang Yuan had to do something. Even if Tsway Boo-qoo held all of Yang Yuan's secrets in his hands, if the man was dead, he would never have a chance to tell them. Archers, release the... Before he could say arrows, his voice died like a throttled rooster, wide-eyed and instantly muted. A blade was pressed firmly against his neck. Screams rose from all around. Everyone stumbled back from Yang Yuan and his assailant. A man was wearing the armor of the commandery guard. He raised his head slightly, revealing the face under his helmet. Guan Shanhai. While the riots in the city had distracted the soldiers, Guan Shanhai had taken the opportunity to sneak through their ranks. Everyone's eyes were on the refugees occupying the governor's residence, and thus no one had noticed as he quietly approached Yang Yuan and got close enough to threaten him. As agony spread through Yang Yuan's neck, he realized his assailant truly meant to kill him. Desperate to save himself, he shouted, "Stop!" That single cry revealed his thoughts. Now Tsway Boo-qoo was even more certain he'd made the right move. Yang Yuan was confident as long as his enemies feared death. Only when they didn't fear it did he become afraid. Tsway Boo-qoo looked around. "Put down your weapons and surrender," he said coldly. "The culprit will be held accountable, but those who merely followed orders will go unpunished." The surrounding soldiers were rattled by the commotion in the city and had begun to panic as well. Other than Yang Yuan's few confidants, the rest of his men had no unwavering loyalty to him. As for his personal guards, now that he'd been captured, they didn't dare make any rash moves. Xian stood in the doorway. She'd been a step too late to catch Wu Yi, after all. Tsway Boo-qoo had called Pei Jingzhe's name, not hers. She saw Guan Shanhai, who'd supposedly been sent to Zhao's tea house in search of evidence, yet had instead masqueraded as an ordinary soldier from the governor's residence. While she'd been mired in indecision, while others thought Tsway Boo-qoo completely helpless, he had already laid out the entire game of chess and predetermined the results. Even Rong finally came in handy. He stepped forward, full of righteous fervor, and strenuously denounced Yang Yuan, then promised not to persecute anyone else present. At his impassioned speech, the archers finally lowered their bows, and rank after rank of the surrounding soldiers followed suit, throwing down their weapons. At last, only Yang Yuan's personal guards were left. No power remained to him. Xian had thought she had a thorough understanding of Tsway Boo-qoo's abilities, but at that moment she realized even she had underestimated him. Lately, Tsway Boo-qoo had cooperated frequently with Feng. The sight of Deputy Chief Feng beside him, flashy and ostentatious, gave many the illusion that the success of their collaboration relied more on Fungar's martial arts than Tsway Boo-qoo's intelligence. After all, no one could turn a blind eye to Feng Xiao's dazzling appearance. Even the members of the 13 floors of Yuanhai had focused more of their efforts on Feng Xiao. But all of them were wrong. Although Tsway Boo-qoo didn't know martial arts, his frail body was also his shield. By the time Yang Yuan realized he'd underestimated his enemy, it was too late. As if sensing Xiaoshan's eyes on him, Tsway Boo-qoo turned and met her gaze. When did your lordship send people to the county prison? Xiaoshan asked her next question with great difficulty. Why didn't you tell us? In illusion lies truth. In truth lies illusion. Tsway Boo-qoo's expression was inscrutable. No one had noticed the disappearance of the 2 Zoya guards who had accompanied them. Their martial arts were mediocre, and they couldn't be of much help. At most, they could run errands. It hadn't been surprising that they were scarce for several days. Even Xiaoshan hadn't thought much of their departure. But when Yang Yuan charged over in readiness to kill, those 2 guards had been enough to launch a sneak attack on the county prison and release the refugees and prisoners. Xiaoshan should have been first to hear of this plan, yet she'd been kept in the dark, reduced to the same level as Rong Qing. Her breath hitched at the thought, and her eyes met Tsway Boo-qoo's clear and frigid gaze. She suddenly felt cold all over. Lord Chief, you knew everything? Tsway Boo-qoo didn't answer her unspoken question. He didn't even give her a second glance. Instead, he turned, his cloak billowing skyward, and resolutely brought his hand down, completing the gesture Yang Yuan had failed to perform. By authority of the Emperor, seize Yang Yuan's guards. As effortless as blowing away dust. Yang Yuan's face was ashen. He swayed on his feet, watching his personal guards scram to fall to the ground as they were stabbed in the chest. Defeat was as contagious as any disease. Their morale shattered instantly, not least because the man they were loyal to was still in the hands of the enemy. Considering the matter mostly settled, Pei Jingzhe bound Wu Yi's arms behind his back and went to help Guan Shanhai deal with Yang Yuan. When he saw Tsway Boo-qoo had mounted Yang Yuan's horse, he grabbed a horse of his own to follow him and ordered everyone to accompany them to the governor's residence to clean up the aftermath. We're going to the governor's residence. Do you want to come? He trotted up to Xiaoshan, bending down and extending a hand to her. Xiaoshan was startled. The Lord Chief didn't say I could go. You're from the Zoya Bureau, said Pei Jingzhe confused. If I can go, of course you can too. Xiaoshan hesitated for a moment. She didn't take Pei Jingzhe's hand. Instead, she leapt lightly onto the horse behind him and gathered up the reins. Hi-ya! Pei Jingzhe was stunned. He suddenly felt that his and Xiaoshan's roles were reversed, and that he looked more like the beautiful woman being protected by her sturdy arms. Xiaoshan didn't notice his awkwardness and only saw him looking around. She frowned. What are you looking at? Stop fidgeting so much. Strange. Where is my lord? Pei Jingzhe couldn't locate the deputy chief's familiar figure in the crowd. No matter how perilous Feng Yuan Tavern was, Feng Xiao had been gone for most of the day. Surely he should have been back by now. To think that from start to finish, Feng Xiao had played no role in this incident. When Feng Xiao had walked into Feng Yuan Tavern some hours earlier, the sky was a buried mixture of blue and purple, the golden glow of sunset clinging to the horizon. The tavern had only 1 floor, and the smell of wine wafted out into the street. A handful of people, perhaps 10 in total, sat scattered across 3 of 4 tables, chatting in low voices. No one looked up at Feng Xiao's arrival. They kept talking among themselves, paying him no mind, as if he didn't exist at all. Feng Xiao was instantly displeased. He was a grand, dignified, elegant, dashing, peerless young man. If he was second best, no one could claim to be first. He'd never been ignored like this. He settled himself down cross-legged and slapped a hand on the table. Where's the owner? The waiters? Are you all dead? Serve the wine. Perhaps his attitude was too abrasive because the other guests finally looked over at him. Feng Xiao smiled gleefully. Others were afraid of the limelight, but he reveled in it. Not only was he not annoyed at being scrutinized by strangers, he even flashed them a toothy grin. The waiter rushed over with a jar of wine. How can I help you, sir? Langling wine. The waiter looked troubled. My apologies, sir, but we have no Langling wine here. Langling is too far away. Then what kind of wine do you have? Just bring up some good wine. I have plenty of money, if nothing else. The waiter raised the jar he was holding. The best-selling wine here is Amber Light. Would your lordship care to try it? Feng Xiao smiled. I don't want to drink Amber Light. I want to drink Lanling wine. If there's no Lanling wine, give me some penalty wine. Really quick footnote. Penalty wine is wine someone must drink as a forfeit for refusing a toast, used as an idiom for doing something the hard way. Returning to the reading. The waiter looked baffled. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered a customer trying to pick a fight, but it was certainly the first time he'd encountered a customer who said he wanted to drink penalty wine. You're not going to say you don't even have penalty wine, are you? Feng Xiao asked. The corner of the waiter's mouth twitched. I'm sorry, sir, but we really don't have such a thing. Feng Xiao's expression modulated from joy to anger in the blink of an eye. He threw up his hands, overturning the table, and the porcelain plates, cups, and bowls all clattered as they fell to the floor. Huh! What kind of rotten tavern are you running here where you don't have anything worth serving? He grabbed for the waiter's throat, but the waiter showed no sign of panic. The man hurled the jar of wine at Feng Xiao and twisted to avoid the attack. At the same time, the seated guests all rose in unison. Some barehanded and some wielding weapons. They leapt toward Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao laughed loudly and shot into the air. Quick as lightning, he avoided their attacks and caught the waiter. Then he slowed, transitioning from an arrow to a feather as he landed lightly in the rafters overlooking everyone below. You laid such an inescapable trap, yet Xiao Lu is still too scared to show his face, he jeered. To deal with you, the 11 first-tier martial artists here are plenty, a familiar voice called out. There's no need for the pavilion leader to appear himself. Yuan Sansa strolled out of the rear hall and stood with his hands behind his back. Feng Xiao was so high up that Yuan Sansa had to bend his neck back to speak to him. Apparently dissatisfied with the lack of intimidation factor, he followed Feng Xiao's lead and jumped up into the rafters as well. A familiar face, Feng Xiao called. Lao Yuan, it's been many days since we parted, and you've grown thin. Could Xiao Lu have been so upset with your failure at Mount Tiannan that he refused to feed you? Hearing Feng Xiao gaily rubbing salt in his wound, Yuan Sansa exploded with fury. At Mount Tiannan, Fan Yuan's betrayal and the actions of the Zuoye and Jiejian bureaus had severely weakened the 13 floors of Yunhai. The position of commandery governor Yuan Sansa had painstakingly worked toward for many years had also been ripped from him, and he was left with no choice but to adopt a new identity and retreat into the shadows. And after spending so many years basking in the light, how could he possibly be pacified by some expensive clothes and delicacies? He snorted coldly. Feng Xiao, can you believe Tsway Boo-qoo knew this was a trap, yet still asked you to come? I believe it. Feng Xiao's smile was radiant. I believe in your mother's ass. What? Before he'd finished speaking, he was rushing toward Yuan Sansa. The 11 masters watched hungrily from the tavern floor. They were waiting for any sign of weakness from Feng Xiao, ready to seize their chance to dart in and kill him in a single blow. Chapter 146. Yuan Sansa recalled something a senior from his sect had once told him. When 5 martial arts masters had besieged Huan Yue sect leader Yan Wushi, it hadn't mattered how formidable he was. Under their combined assault, he had nearly lost his life. At present, Feng Xiao faced not just the formidable enemy Yuan Sansa, but 11 other first-tier martial artists. Even the most skilled grandmaster in the world would find themselves as helpless as Yan Wushi in this situation. The pavilion leader had given orders that Tsway Boo-qoo was to be spared, but Feng Xiao should be killed. There was no need to hold back. Feng Xiao must die. The 11 experts moved in sync with Yuan Sansa. No matter what, Feng Xiao would meet his end today. There was no chance he'd walk out of this tavern. Although the tavern door was open, no one with eyes would dare enter upon seeing the commotion within. As it was, people in the city could barely feed themselves after the recent downpour and flooding. No one was in the mood to come in for a drink. Yet as the battle unfolded in the rafters, someone did walk through the door. He wore black robes and a black cloak, and his pace and demeanor were leisurely as he fanned himself and looked around. The 11 experts all turned to stare. But not only did they fail to teach this uninvited guest who'd foolishly overestimated himself a lesson, their expressions went strange, as if they'd seen a ghost. The sky wasn't yet fully dark, though night was closing in. It was the time when monsters, ghosts, and demons came out to roam. The uninvited guest acted as if nothing was amiss, not even glancing up at the rafters. He chose a seat and sat down, tapping the table with his fan. I just want to know who it is. Such a fine tavern, yet no one selling any wine. His appearance and voice were identical to Feng Xiao's. Could it be that the first Feng Xiao was an imposter, and the Feng Xiao who'd just come in was the real one? It wasn't just the 11 experts who were staring. Yuan Sansa also caught sight of the newcomer. One person might wonder if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but if all 12 of them saw it, it must be so. There really were 2 identical Feng Xiaos. In a duel between experts, nothing was more important than maintaining focus. Yuan Sansa spared only a quick glance at the new Feng Xiao, but this was enough. Faster than the blink of an eye, someone slipped through the gaps between his palm attacks, and zither strings shot soundlessly toward his face. Yuan Sansa moved to block without a second thought, but his foe attacked from the other side too. Pain throbbed through his shoulder, and he groaned and stumbled, falling from the rafters. Before his feet touched the ground, he slung himself around a pillar and swept toward Feng Xiao once more. At the same time, the 11 masters all rushed toward the other Feng Xiao, who stood as solidly as a mountain. The second Feng Xiao laughed loudly. He didn't wait to meet them head-on, but flitted behind the wine jar cabinets. Amid the palm blasts and flashing blades, the wine jars fell and shattered, their contents sloshing onto the floor. The wine's rich fragrance poured into the martial experts' lungs with every inhale, filling them with a rush of intoxication. Many of these martial experts possessed a keen sense of smell. The 2 Feng Xiaos shared an identical stature and voice, but there were subtle differences in their sense. Thanks to the wine jars shattering, the aroma of wine clung to everyone, making them wholly indistinguishable. A new silhouette appeared in the doorway. Another Feng Xiao. This time, no one was shocked. The third Feng Xiao laughed brightly. What a coincidence, Lao Yuan. Have you been well? Yuan Sansa didn't deign to respond. He and the Feng Xiao fighting in the rafters separated and landed, one on either side of the roof. 3 Feng Xiaos, one in the rafters, one standing on the wine jar fragments, and one in the doorway. The 3 were indistinguishable. Who could be certain there wouldn't be a fourth? Yuan Sansa gave a sneering laugh. Petty tricks. Feng Xiao, you always saw yourself as better than everyone else, yet you resort to such methods to keep yourself alive? Of course 3 Feng Xiaos couldn't really exist. It had to be a disguise. Even if no one could distinguish between them from their appearance alone, the 3 Feng Xiaos couldn't possibly all wield the same signature weapon. Lao Yuan, said the Feng Xiao at the door, you brought 11 people to ambush me, but you won't allow me to use any helpers? What's that they say? State officials are allowed to set fires, but the common folk aren't allowed to light a lamp? Oh my gosh, this picture is so cute. Let me continue. The Feng Xiao in the rafters sighed. Now look how you've embarrassed him. The 13 floors of Yuan have already used up all their tricks. The Feng Xiao standing beside the wine cabinet laughed arrogantly. Xiao Lu doesn't have the courage to face us himself. He's pushed you out as a pawn instead. Lao Yuan, as one of the most vital members of the organization, don't you feel frustrated? Yuan Sansa turned a deaf ear. He swooped down from the rafters like a diving falcon, wind and lightning behind him. One palm became 10, 10 became 1,000, until hundreds of thousands of afterimages howled toward Feng Xiao from all directions. Night had fallen, and the tavern lantern swayed as the wind gusted in. The candle flames wavered, casting their flickering light over the chaotic interior. The 11 masters melted into shadows as they swept toward the 2 Feng Xiaos on the ground. Each held unique weapons and had differing proficiencies in Qinggong, the swiftest quickly taking the lead. The ones who were half a step behind would forever be grateful for the inferiority of their skills. It saved their lives. The Feng Xiao beside the cabinet leapt up into the air, his palm strikes surging with the force that could topple mountains as he confronted the 3 rushing toward him. The Feng Xiao at the door smoothly unshouldered the zither on his back. Bolstered by his qi, the instrument soared into the air and spun rapidly until a slender yet powerful hand steadied it. Fingers plucked the strings, and music poured in. Though the notes were monotonous, the energy-infused sound waves had already reached their target. The 3 frontmost martial experts felt blood trickle from their ears as their heads began to ring, filled only with the single sound. Like a blizzard of snowflakes or a ferocious downpour, the noise reached its crescendo before abruptly cutting off, leaving silence behind. Blood poured from their noses and mouths as the world spun around them, their movements becoming sluggish. The zither-wielding Feng Xiao snorted coldly, but to them, that small sound was like the ringing of a great bronze bell, striking them squarely in the chest. Their bodies went rigid as Feng Xiao struck them with the zither, the force behind their blades instantly falling away. Twice he swung the zither, then 3 times. None were spared as they screamed and went flying. Up in the rafters, Yuan Sansa was still embroiled in combat with the first Feng Xiao when he noticed the situation on the ground. His lip curled. When Feng Xiao had pretended to join the 13 floors of Yuan, he had relayed his background to the other directors. Yuan Sansa knew he was the leader of the Fa Jing sect, and that this sect was unique among the 3 demonic sects for using zithers as weapons. The Feng Xiao on the ground was wielding the zither masterfully, so there was no doubt he was the real one. The man in front of him was an obvious fake. 2 cold rays of light flew from Yuan Sansa's sleeves, one arcing toward his foe's neck and the other sweeping in from behind toward his foe's dantian in his lower abdomen. Feng Xiao dropped down, but Yuan Sansa had anticipated this move too. A sneer hung on his lips as he raised a hand and shot a 3rd ray of light. The wind from his palm followed, whistling down toward the top of Feng Xiao's head. Feng Xiao was mid-fall. He shouldn't be able to call upon his internal energy now. Even if he managed to withstand Yuan Sansa's assault, he'd have no chance to counterattack. Once that palm hit, it would either shatter his skull or leave him gravely injured, throwing up blood and tea into chaos. Someone screamed nearby. Feng Xiao's dark cloak flared as he soared upward like a black feathered phoenix, only to swoop back down toward the ground. It was a sight as arrogant as it was dazzling, unmatched in glory. The string in his hand was as sharp as any blade, capable of cleaving stone and steel. 2 heads rolled to the floor. Feng Xiao remained unyielding, his speed and momentum unstoppable as he lunged forward. The tavern was like the swirling maelstrom at the beginning of time. Wherever his black robes swept, a crimson trail followed in his wake. He sliced through the primordial chaos, and thousands of ghosts howled in the desolate night. The metallic stink of blood had come to overshadow the fragments of wine. Feng Xiao was merciless in his attack. The 11 first-tier experts became nothing but novices before his onslaught, unable to keep up or fight back. The 3 Feng Xiao seemed to overlap before separating again, as if he had truly split himself into 3. Could there really be 3 Feng Xiaos? one of the 11 thought in a days. The man's surname was Zhu, given name Ye Qing. He hailed from the Songshan sect and wielded a sword. The Songshan sect wasn't a large one, but Zhu Yeqing was exceptionally talented. At the age of 25, he'd single-handedly defeated the 3 heroes of the Gobi, a triumph that elevated him to fame. Liuli Palace of Fanjiang Isle ranked him 37th on their list. Everyone aspired to be the strongest in the world, and he'd made it to the top 50. He was no ordinary expert. Tonight he'd planned to use Feng Xiao's death to propel his reputation to even greater heights, but he'd never anticipated his enemy would be so powerful. Zhu Yeqing had studied martial arts diligently since childhood with the goal of becoming renowned throughout the land. Now he knew he'd never achieve this dream in this lifetime. Ghostly shadows danced, and the lamplight dazzled. When the last glimmer disappeared, like a candle snuffed in the wind, Zhu Yeqing's vision went dark forever. Around him, the fight went on. The remaining masters knew tonight's battle was a fight to the death. There was no room for compromise or mercy. Feng Xiao had to die. If he didn't, every one of them would die in his stead. Yuan Sansa's palm met one of Feng Xiao's. Qi surged wildly between them. Both men were repelled to opposite sides of the tavern, where they landed firmly on their feet. Yuan Sansa was flagging. His tea and blood were boiling, but he forced himself to swallow the coppery blood down. He didn't know if Feng Xiao was in a similar state, but he didn't dare take the gamble. His certainty was in his own victory was gone. Yuan Sansa knew too well that doubt could cause him to falter. He suddenly remembered something the pavilion leader had said to him before he left. Feng Xiao had used the 2 Sarira, and his martial arts had greatly improved. He was now a formidable nemesis of the 13 floors of Yuanhai who must be eliminated at all costs. Although Yuan Sansa knew Feng Xiao was an excellent martial artist, at the time he'd refused to see that the pavilion leader's words had been a warning to Yuan Sansa himself. Now he had to admit that the pavilion leader was right. Feng Xiao's lightning-fast progress and prodigious talent were truly unmatched. What was more, he wielded the authority of the Zhejian Bureau and shared a peculiar relationship with Tsway Boo-qoo. 2 men, one outstanding in martial arts and the other in wisdom, learning from each other's strengths to bridge their weaknesses. How could the 13 floors leave such a powerful enemy alive? All at once, the tavern went quiet. Even the strong wind outside seemed to have been strangled, unable to make a sound. Including Yuan Sansa, 6 experts remained. As for Feng Xiao, there were still 3 of him. He'd killed half of Yuan Sansa's men. Yuan Sansa's doubts continued to grow. The ability to split oneself into multiple copies was the stuff of myth and legend. It was impossible for Feng Xiao to really create 2 more of himself. But there were also very few people at his level of martial arts. Of them, who would rush over to willingly play his doppelganger? There had to be differences in the martial arts of the 3 opponents, and they were certain to have unique weaknesses too. As long as Yuan Sansa could identify the copies and leave them to the other experts while he focused on the real Feng Xiao, his chances of victory would be greatly increased. Yuan Sansa centered himself, closed his eyes, and listened for the enemy's movements in the darkness. The tavern was silent. It was as if even their breathing had stopped. Blood clung to the silk zither string, flowing along until it condensed into a fat drop. Finally, the silk could no longer bear their weight. The drop plinked to the ground. One of the Feng Xiaos made the slightest movement, an unconscious action. This person was the weakest martial artist of the 3. Yuan Sansa whistled, and 2 of the experts leapt forward to attack the Feng Xiao who'd moved. One of the remaining 2 Feng Xiaos couldn't resist darting over to save his companion. That person was also a copy. 3 more experts struck. Yuan Sansa didn't hesitate. He gathered all the cold light in his hands and transformed it into a longsword, lunging toward the last Feng Xiao. The riot at the governor's residence was quickly quelled. The victims and death row prisoners had been locked away for a long time. They were greatly weakened. Under the leadership of the Zoya guards, they'd relied on the strength of their own outrage and the lack of sentries to capture the residents. The instant Tsway Boo-qoo arrived with soldiers, the situation was swiftly contained. Pei Jingzhe, arriving shortly after, breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Tsway Boo-qoo had avoided harming any of the refugees. Perhaps his relief was too obvious, because Tsway Boo-qoo's mouth curved faintly. Were you worried I'd use the refugees to free us from our predicament? Then order them killed to tie up loose ends? Pei Jingzhe went red. It was a foolish thought. I may not be a good person, but I've no interest in attacking unarmed civilians. If not for the flood and Yang Yuan's corruption, they'd just be ordinary people. They'll be our best witnesses against Yang Yuan, Wu Yi, and the others. Go gather everyone up and take a tally. Keep them in one place. Don't let them run around and cause trouble. Then search the governor's residence. Yang Yuan has hidden a portion of the grain here somewhere. When you find it, make some kanji for these people. Let them eat first. Pei Jingzhe snapped to attention and hurried away at once, completely forgetting that Tsway Boo-qoo was the chief of the Tsway Bureau and technically had no power to give him orders. Rong piped up, "Tsway Xian, how can I help?" The death row prisoners are still mixed in with the victims of the flood. Find the register and figure out who the real criminals are and who were unjustly imprisoned by Yang Yuan. It'll be hard work. But this kind of work was Rong Qing's specialty. He eagerly got started. The governor's residence was in shambles thanks to the refugees, and many had taken advantage of the chaos to plunder Yang Yuan's more valuable treasures. Tsway Boo-qoo, however, had ordered the 2 Tsway guards to focus their search on Yang Yuan's study. Now they reported that they'd indeed found something strange there. Yang Yuan was hauled over, his hands tied behind his back. Tsway Boo-qoo led him into the study, where the floor tiles under the desk had been removed, revealing a dark hole. Important dignitaries often had separate entrances to their rooms. Even then, if they had unsavory secrets to keep, they'd also needed places like this to hide the evidence. Yang Yuan was unsurprised to see the secret chamber opened. He'd been pale and silent this entire time, but now he spoke. "Tsway Boo-qoo, I can't stop you from going in, but I beg you, please go alone. This matter concerns the reputation of the royal family. Unrelated persons must not know." "Did you not think of the royal family's reputation when you did these things?" Tsway Boo-qoo asked curiously. "Or did you remember that your surname is Yang only now?" "I guarantee there are no traps inside," cried Yang Yuan hoarsely. "But there are some things only you should see." "The Tsway Bureau is bound by duty. There is nothing we cannot know," said Tsway Boo-qoo coldly. The two of them were standing very close in the lamplight. The longer Tsway Boo-qoo gazed at him, the more he felt that Yang Yuan resembled someone he'd seen before. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't comment on it. He asked the 2 Tsway guards to send Yang Yuan in first to light the lamp, then followed, descending step by step down the stone staircase into the secret chamber. The candle flamed to life, and Tsway Boo-qoo and the 2 Tsway guards looked around, stunned. Whew. All right, you guys. I think that is a good stopping point. The crazy thing is, it is Friday night. And I feel like I could keep going. Like, honestly, I feel like I could just keep reading for the rest of this weekend and then give y'all an extremely long video for Monday. But we're going to stop right here because I don't know why. Yeah, okay. Actually, you know what? I think it's good to stop. I don't want to do videos that are too long because then it'll be more and more information that I have to cover at the end. And I don't want to talk forever at the end, even though, I do my notes and stuff. So I do have a couple of notes that we're just going to go over, and we are going to start with my very first note, which kind of came true, but also didn't come true, because if you guys remember, I said that I did not trust Xiao Liu, and I was right not to, because it wasn't Xiao Liu. So I'm glad that I was right about that, or actually I'm not glad about it, because the real Xiao Liu is dead, and that sucks. I mean, I never met him, but he seemed like he was kind to Rong Qing, and Rong Qing greatly cared for him. It also seemed that after knowing of his aide's death, or his servant's death, that he became a bit more shrewd, a bit less impulsive. So that's good for him. Now, the next thing that I want to go to is actually from a highlight I have on page 253. And this isn't even about the story at all. I just like this saying or this phrase. I don't know if it's an actual phrase in Mandarin and I didn't look it up, but it says, distant waters couldn't extinguish a nearby fire. And I just thought that was so profound. That was really cool. So anyway, if you guys don't remember, this was, I guess, when Xiao Liu was actually trying to kill Tsway Boo-qoo. And it was like, even if, Feng Xiao knew that there was danger, he wouldn't be able to come back in time because distant waters couldn't extinguish a nearby fire. Makes perfect sense. So I just loved the phrasing of that. I really should look up and see if it's an actual saying. Nevertheless, what is the lest? I don't know. I've been talking a lot today. So the next thing that I want to cover is, let's see. Oh, I just have a note here that says Xiao Liu is not Xiao Liu. So we don't need to speak on that anymore. Next, let's talk about the big thing with Xian. Not Xian. She can't be the traitor. I mean, it makes perfect sense because the ones closest to you are usually the ones that you got to watch out for. But I'm just like, no, not her. And he has a soft spot for her. The one person that he shows softness with is the one person who's a traitor. I hope things work out. That's all I can say. Like, Xian, I hope that her feelings towards Tsway Boo-qoo and the, reverence that she has for him will override why ever she has become the traitor. I need that to happen because if not, I'm gonna be pissed and I'm gonna have some complaints from Meng Xi Shi. Not really. I won't have any complaints, but I'll be upset. Next, we have to go to this whole debacle with Feng Xiao being gone and Yang Yuan coming to see Tsway Boo-qoo, just telling him, like, surrender yourself, no one else gets hurt. First off, our show was looking like, okay, but even with his conversation with Feng Xiao, and he was like, Feng Xiao was like, so what's your plan? He was like, I've pulled out all my cards. I've got nothing, dude. I was like, come on. Tsway Boo-qoo, you are right. You are not a god, so you can make mistakes too, but come on. I know you're the main character. There's a whole another book. You and Feng Xiao haven't gotten together yet. So what's your plan? I was like, it can't end here. Okay. So to see everything just come to fruition, with his plan that was, I'm sorry, I didn't even finish that sentence. We were kept in the dark. Just like Xian. So I feel a little bit betrayed by Tsway Boo-qoo because how dare you treat me, the reader, like I'm the traitor. Look, I've got your back here, Tsway Boo-qoo, okay? I love you. I adore you. Still, okay. Anyway, I just thought that was amazing. And that's the crazy thing. Yang Yuan really should have just killed him, in all honesty, because when you give people the chance to talk, they can really turn the tables. A lot of people don't realize the power of words. Words can truly stop people in their tracks. And that's exactly what happened. And that hesitation, not listening to Wu Yi, who was like, kill him dead. Well, look at what it cost him. So we'll see what's in his little secret chamber thingy or whatever, because I want to know. And actually, I was going to read the next chapter, but I was like, nah, I'm going to stop here to leave y'all with the cliffhanger. Am I a sadist for that? Anyway, are people yelling outside? I'm sorry if you guys can hear that. So the next thing, speaking of Feng Xiao, 3 Feng Xiaos. Okay, so has he done something so amazing that he has split himself into 3? Or does he have people from the Fa Jing sect that are there and they all know how to, mask themselves as other people? Like, what is this? I need to know. Either way, I think it's really cool, but I need to know how it's happening so that things can make sense to me. They really need to start forming. And it's crazy because at first, when the first Feng Xiao came out, I was like, okay, who is it? Because it was like everybody thought they had seen a ghost. Before it was revealed that it was a second Feng Xiao, I was like, okay, a ghost. Who could it possibly be? I don't know. Who's dead? And I was like, Tsway Boo-qoo. That's so stupid. That's just such a stupid random guess, but it wasn't. It was Feng Xiao. So anyway, I'm looking forward to see how that fight continues. They kind of cut it off and went back to Tsway Boo-qoo. But anyway, that is pretty much all I have to say about these chapters. There was just so much that has happened, and it was looking helpless, but we see that it's not so hopeless. And I'm ready to see how this ends. And just so you all know, I plan on doing another long video, because this weekend I actually do have work this weekend. It's like a marathon weekend of me doing what? Moderating some fine arts classes, some watercolor classes. But other than that, I've got nothing else on my plate other than painting myself. And so I'm like, okay, if I can read like 2 chapters on Saturday, 2 chapters on Sunday, 2 chapters on Monday, we'll be done. Because let's see, there's chapters 47 and 48 for Saturday, chapter 49 and 50 for Sunday, and 51 and 52 on Monday. Boom. Then we'll be done, and we can go back to Devil Venerable also wants to know, while we lament the fact that we've finished the 4th volume of Peerless and now have to wait until October, which is totally sucky. So anyway, that is my plan, I guess, just so you all know. And hopefully you all like that the last 2 videos for Peerless are going to be a little longer. Which, by the way, I just want to know, like, you guys' thoughts on longer videos. I try to keep the reading, at least now with everything that I'm doing, I try to keep them within like an hour of reading, or maybe just a tiny bit over, and then leave some notes. But I just want to know, how would you all feel if I did 2-hour videos? The one thing I will say though, if I do 2-hour videos, then I'm not going to be posting Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. It would probably be more like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, to allow me more time to do that. But you can tell me, would you prefer to have more days of me reading, which is really just one more? Or would you have longer videos and one less day of me reading? Just a inquiry. Not sure I'll do anything with that, but just asking, to see what my peoples want. So anyway, that is all I have to say. We have 71 pages left in this story, and we just finished reading 77. So I hope you all enjoyed these chapters. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions in the comment section, and woo! Let's do the doggone thing, shall we? 我爱你们.